One by the time she gets here.
Okay, she said she had to work in Rogers City this morning.
Sarah. I'm Sarah. Yeah, I'm Michelle. Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too.
So the emergency management director interviews, and as a group, how do you want to split up the questions? What did you just? There's
Go down a list 5 each.
I think if we just take turns, maybe starting at top end and
okay.
take turns picking one off the list, just say which number, and we can kind of circle as we go with it.
Just go down the line.
Yep,
I think pick whichever question you want. Like something that you might be more important to you, and then we would just always see if it's the same question.
well, we'd have to. Do you know what ones you want particularly? Because you had some. That you
I
were
just
adding as well.
added a couple, I guess.
I'm just thinking if you want to do
Yeah,
the
the
first
first
5,
five.
I'm like
Okay.
doing the first 5, do the second 5, third.
Gotcha.
We're gonna do all
Okay.
Will that
25
work?
on, make it easy. So
So
Okay.
we're not rotating. Okay, go for it.
Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
Bob is going to start.
I guess we'll start with what are the biggest challenges in implementing a mass notifications?
They're in a different one.
I remember that with 25 here.
That's those.
In her packet.
But then you can circle, you can
Updated
score
them.
right at the spot.
Yeah, then there's.
Okay, what are your expectations for developing Montgomery County's emergency program or EP program? EM program, excuse me.
Well, I know what Montmorency County has been through. I have been the emergency services coordinator for Presque Isle County for the last 6 years, going into my 7th year. And when I started this program in Presque Isle, it was in a very similar situation, although there wasn't the turnover. It was a 10-hour-a-week position out of someone's home. And so when I got into this role, I was merely brought boxes from this individual's garage to sort through to start developing a program. So basically, very similar situation. I came in 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago, with really no starting place. And so over the last 6 years, I've been able to build the program into something very substantial and I think very beneficial for the county and the residents. And so I feel that I have the experience to do the same for Montmorency County.
Made you choose to apply for Montmorency County?
Well, I absolutely love what I do and I want to stay within emergency management, but I am part-time up in Presque Isle. And it is sometimes financially challenging to work part-time when you're used to working full-time. So I'm really seeking that full-time position, doing what I love.
What are your strengths and weaknesses as an emergency manager?
Well, I'm extremely organized. And actually that is kind of my weakness too, because to a fault, I'm almost OCD organized. I like organization, but it helps me be more effective when I'm trying to multitask with a lot of things. It's very helpful. So it's kind of a positive and a negative. Because being organized sometimes takes a little more time. But yes.
Can you detail your experience in leading evacuation operations?
Can you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Can you detail your experience in leading evacuation operations?
Well, having not actually taken part in any type of evacuations, I do a lot of exercise and training, specifically to our mass notification systems with IPAWS, which is the federal notification systems. We do a lot of training. I do personally a lot of training with notifying residents on a monthly basis. I have to send out notifications for evacuations, and I know Montmorency County has always been a higher fire danger county. So that's very important, I know, but I personally have not participated in any activity, real life activity with evacuations.
And what is your experience with other government agencies, emergency services, nonprofit organizations, and community relations? Elaborate, please.
I work with nonprofits. I work with the schools, first responders, law, fire, EMS on a daily basis, and work very well with them, as well as other government agencies throughout the state and the region. It's just the nature of the job, so I'm very comfortable doing that and working and building those relationships.
I just want to elaborate on the first questions on the expectations. So what would be, if you were hired, what would be your first immediate steps coming in? And then what would you look to be doing like your first 3 months, 6 months, and year on the job?
Well, most importantly, to get a good understanding of what is in place here in the county, what type, I know your hazard mitigation plan was passed, and so I think that's good for a few years. But just trying to figure out what emergency plans may be in place or may not be in place, to start getting those drafted. There's a number of people that need to get their hands, lay their hands and their eyes on them, from all aspects of law, fire, EMS, the county commissioners. And secondly, the other main thing would be to get out and start introductions and partnerships with your townships, township officials. The school partnership I already have, because I'm actually part of the school collaborative through AMA for school safety. So those partnerships are already present. But really getting out into the communities of Hillman, Lewiston, Atlanta, and meeting the folks, finding out where all the township halls are, getting familiar with churches locally. So just really kind of immersing yourself into those partnerships with those folks here in the county. So I think those are the two biggest steps that need to take place. The plans obviously are kind of they're fluid. And so drafting those, and those are should be changing every time something happens in the county. But those are the two major things over the first 6 months that kind of I would foresee being tackled.
What role do you see technology playing in modern emergency management? And then have you implemented any innovative technologies or methods to enhance disaster preparedness?
Yes, so when I came into this role, Presque Isle County virtually had nothing. And so we had 800 megahertz radios that my office is a part of with law enforcement, fire, EMS, and so that, I mean, that was in place, but we didn't have really an office. We didn't have an emergency services operational center. We didn't have any technology, but with a partnership through Region 7, Emergency Management, Homeland Security, the funding opportunities that they have allowed our county and the regional counties to tap into to strengthen the operations center has been very helpful for Presque Isle County. We have been able to put in place video conferencing equipment, an OWL, that's what we use up there. It's an OWL system, TVs, laptops, tablets for damage assessment. So we're really equipped with a fully functional emergency operational center now to be able to connect in with the state of Michigan if need be, any other partners in the region. So I feel like we're very prepared up there from a technology standpoint, other than we had Frontier Internet. And with the ice storm, we found that that was not sufficient enough. And so we have fiber now. We're getting backup through Starlink. So we're going to have two different avenues of internet capability. And that will also help with our phone system. We currently operate only via cell phone, which is probably not the best idea. So when we get the Starlink implemented, we will then have capability to have satellite telephone services and that type of thing. So really in the last 6 years, coming from no technology at all to really ramping things up. And unfortunately, our county IT services are not housed in the county. And so all of our web services are actually with an individual out of Florida. And that's something that I would like to see more advanced. What April did with the ice storm, I think it was you. The ice storm damage page for residents to go to. Every county across the country should have that with resources available at their fingertips should places have internet. But unfortunately, I don't have access to being able to get in to do that, but that's something that I would hope the county would work towards. So I've been involved from the bottom, kind of building up in the process.
Can you illustrate a situation where you successfully adapted an emergency plan mid-crisis?
Oh, gosh, yes. The ice storm has taught us all a lot. Presque Isle County, very similar to Montmorency County, without having fully staffed departments, the fire departments. And many county commissioners are employed, working individuals. It's very hard to open an emergency operations center with very minimal people. And I feel like Presque Isle County is just a mirror of Montmorency County. But when we activated, this is truly, other than COVID, which COVID was more of a Department of Health and Human Services activation. So this situation was quite a bit different. But when we activated our Emergency Operations Center, the players that you typically would have a part of that, it didn't fall out like it should in a more metropolitan type county. But we had a lot of things working against us without the cell service, without the internet, without power. And so it's very challenging in those situations to try to get all the players to the table. So as I'm operating as a one-man show, one-woman show, you know, you get so many days in, there's only so much you can do as one person. And so we quickly brought in Team Rubicon, which I wish I would have brought in from the beginning. But it just gave us those extra bodies to carry out those functions that one person possibly couldn't do. So, you know, a few days in, we had to regroup and bring in those extra players that I wish we would have had from day one. So.
I'm going to add another question to my fellow board members that's not on here, but what steps would you take in the emergency planning process to help protect the most vulnerable in the community during an emergency?
Well, again, we learned a ton, and my background coming to this position was healthcare, but working with our health providers in our areas, we gathered so much information in a short period of time to find out who those people are, whether they were elderly on oxygen, pregnant mothers, with newborns, the elderly, the frail, working with health partners. We have those partnerships established, but using them as a resource in time of disaster, that there are some HIPAA laws that can kind of be stretched a little bit to allow first responders to get the information to get up to those folks as soon as possible. So there are ways to be able to get to those folks and get that information. I think a lot of people worry about HIPAA violation, but in a time of disaster like the ice storm, those things are a little bit more lenient with HIPAA, so.
I'm gonna kind of combine question 8 and 9. How do you conduct risk assessments in rural areas, and kind of tying in with that, how do you maintain up-to-date knowledge of emerging threats and risks?
Well, I know, not sure how your county did it, but the hazard mitigation document is a lot of hazardous threats and rating those. And what I've done is meeting with township officials, having numerous meetings going over, getting the public to come in, sending out surveys, and really keeping in touch with the national weather folks out of Gaylord, as well as at the federal level. There's a lot of emerging weather trends that are coming through as far as weather goes, that can impact fire danger, the risk of increased tornadoes, high wind storms, hail, that kind of thing. So I think being involved and building those partnerships, speaking with those people, and I know from a regional level, they're involved on a monthly basis as well. So keeping open lines of communication, and just kind of reevaluating what threats we may have had 20 years ago are much different than what we have today. So just really staying on top of the communications with partners.
And then my last question, what are the biggest challenges in implementing mass notification systems?
Getting individuals, residents to sign up for them. IPAWS is a national level communication systems that I'm not sure if your county has that yet, that IPAWS designation, but the local or the countywide mass notification system, when I started this position, it had just been implemented a year or so before, and we only had 100 and some folks, couple hundred people maybe on it. And getting people to understand that it's free, what kind of information it brings to them. They typically don't want information being put out a lot. Silly little stuff, that reminders about stuff. They want to be notified when it's something that's going to impact them, their house or their lives. And so just getting some education out to folks and having opportunities for them to be able to sign up. Different avenues, whether it be internet or the county fair or that type of thing, have different avenues for people to sign up for it.
You have any experience with political unrest?
I personally do not. We have had some groups come through Presque County that our law enforcement has handled very well. And
Demonstrators?
we have had, yes. But law enforcement has taken care of it from that standpoint. But what the aftermath of those incidents were in the last year or so, I guess, just getting education out to residents and to folks in the courthouse, local businesses on how to handle that. So, but that's about the extent of it.
What we're doing is having each, starting with Bob, do the first 5, and then Michelle do the next 5 questions. That's how we're doing
So are you done?
Yes.
So going on, what protocols do you follow when dealing with hazardous materials?
So again, we have something that we ramped up as well as our hazardous, our tier 2 sites in the county, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but businesses that have a certain threshold of hazardous material, they have to report to the state on an annual basis. So some folks will actually report, even though they'll do self-reporting, even though they're under that threshold. So we still, from a county perspective, know what chemicals they have on their grounds. We don't have any experts in our county on hazardous material. And so we have a hazard response group out of Gaylord, as well as CRTC in Alpena. So those are our material experts when it comes to large hazardous spills. And so when we encounter anything of that nature, we would get them involved immediately. We often, with our county being on Lake Huron, we often get reports from the Coast Guard very frequently on sheens on the water from the shipping industry and that type of thing. So that's almost like a weekly response that we're working that I work very closely with the Coast Guard, which in Montmorency County, you're a little more isolated from the lakes, from the Great Lakes, but yeah, so that's kind of a weekly thing with the Coast Guard. But luckily nothing has been, a big event type thing. So, so just again, working with our partners that are the experts, the group out of Otsego with John Deming and the Hazard Response Group, they're excellent. But they're really the ones that come in and handle that type of thing. So.
What is your process for training staff and volunteers for emergency readiness? And I'd like to add the second part, forming the LEP and LEPC groups.
Again, something new that I formed in Presque Isle County. There were not the LEPC, LPT, and we've kind of combined them into one just because it's hard to get folks together. And so our LEPC, LPT groups are not just for the hazardous sites, the planning, the reviewing of the plans. Ours is for a number of things. We do a lot of community planning at those meetings. We have residents that come in, business leadership is involved. All of our branches, our law enforcement, fire, EMS are involved. And organizations such as like MDHHS, Department of Health, the DHD, District Health Department number 4, NEMSCA, I'm just trying to think of the umbrella, but we've really gotten them into, initially when, as I understood it, it was supposed to be just for the hazardous sites, but there's just so much to cover. And so we will also use that time to do any event planning, that type of thing. If we have a festival coming up, we'll kind of sit down and look at what planning needs to go on, what implications we see, that kind of thing. So I send out we do quarterly meetings. Ours are in the late afternoon. Just depends, you've kind of got to feel out to when your folks are available to meet. Some people it's easier in the evenings to meet. Some people you just got to kind of try it out and feel what the best time frame for groups is. But we don't have a huge turnout for our LEPC, but we have enough departments and people involved that we feel that there's a lot of participation from those folks in helping us accomplish our goals. So.
Thank you. I'm just going to go back to the first part. What about training for staff and volunteers, like in your EOC?
Yes. So again, that's a challenge. But I keep keep trying to do more training, doing exercises for an EOC activation for county commissioners and those people that participate in your EOC. I think that was a challenge, I think, for us because not enough people understood what their roles were, being part of the Emergency Operations Center. And some feel that maybe they shouldn't be there at all. And so trying to educate them on what their roles and responsibilities are, I think is very helpful. And that's what we're kind of growing through with the ice storm as well. Our first responders, they know that stuff like the back of their hand, but maybe as commissioners or other people that we're bringing into our Emergency Operations Center to help, it's a huge educational piece. And so we're kind of working through that in Presque Isle County as well. But really looking at, from a training standpoint, we have set up an annual schedule for training that needs to go on in the county, whether it be for road commission, county personnel at the courthouse, and what type of exercises we want everybody to be involved in. So working with our law enforcement to kind of, I guess, set those exercises up and then using those as avenues for additional training where we see we need improvements, that kind of thing. So
This one, what is your strategy for managing supply chain and mass electrical grid outage?
Well, luckily, during the ice storm, we did bring in a nonprofit group called Team Rubicon. You guys used Oakland County, so very similar, but Team Rubicon is a nonprofit agency that they travel throughout the country for events such as ice storms or what have you. And I had one individual that's what his role was. And granted, he came from Colorado, and so he didn't know what our resources were here. And so a lot of that comes down to the emergency services coordinator to help kind of direct them. But to have that key individual person that is in charge of doing that is key. Because again, the emergency services coordinator will know what all those local resources are. And so when you bring people from outside of the county, that's where you kind of lose disconnect because they don't know the ins and outs of your county. So, but it's good to have that key person to do the supply chain because when you look at even for the Emergency Operations Center, for the shelters, that kind of thing, it can get out of control really quickly. So.
Can you share your experience with public communication during emergencies? Especially what we had
Right.
with this all going down.
Right. So the key thing, again, with the storm that we just experienced without cell phones, internet, power, we had everything working against us. But the key thing is to make sure the county is accredited with the IPAWS. Because IPAWS kind of trumps every other mode of communication that we may have in place. And if there's notifications that need to get out to the public, we can use that federal system to get those notifications out. And, you know, we have to use many, many different modes of communication. And depending on the scenario, if you have cell service, that's great because you can utilize your mass notification. Do you guys have a mass notification? Do you guys use Code Red or Rave?
We had Rave, we didn't have access to it, so it was kind of a nightmare.
Okay, so nothing right now or?
Just the Rave, it's till, yeah, that's for till 2027.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so utilizing Rave and understanding the system with how those notifications can go out if it goes to everybody, or I know Code Red has a mapping tool that we can get in and map certain areas to communicate with those folks. I'm sure Rave is exactly the same, but to really utilize that enough to where the individual is comfortable getting these communications out to the residents. Because if you don't use it, then you, just like in an emergency, you know, you lose that. And so it's important to keep exercising in your communication systems.
what is your strategy for coordinating with the local, state, and federal agencies during disaster?
Well, as far as like a declaration, even without a declaration, I've worked very closely with the region, the regional partners, and participating in that regional group. Those meetings is essential for this position to be able to communicate and pull in resources. We have a district coordinator that he's really helpful with connecting the counties to the state and state resources. And over time, this position, it's all about communications and building partnerships. And so once you have those, coordinating is much easier at the local level here. So.
You're in a crisis. How do you prioritize resources and personnel?
Well, I don't do it alone. If I'm in an EOC operations type center with a group, we would look at, what type of resources were needed. And, every scenario is going to be different. I can keep resorting back to the ice storm. But when we look at the ice storm, we had road closures. And so road closures were, number one for law enforcement, fire, EMS, ambulances to get out and assist people. So, resource number one in that scenario was to be able to have the roads that were passable for our first responders. That was number one key. And then when you lose power day and, you have no power for day in and day out, and you're going on, days onto weeks of no power, immediately you have to start looking at sheltering and elderly folks or any folks at home, and how do they get heat when the weather, the temperatures were so cold. So it's really like every situation or every scenario is going to be different. The ice storm, we kind of hit everything, but it's just going to depend, and it's going to be a conglomerative decision on what resources are going to be needed at most in which order.
How do you approach developing an all hazards emergency management plan?
Well, it's important to probably look at what you guys have in place now. I'm not sure if you guys have emergency, you must have something probably drafted. But the state does very frequently put out templates for us as emergency service coordinators to use. They give us a lot of resources to develop at the county level and to streamline processes. So I'm currently doing that in Presque County because our emergency operations plan is about this thick, and the likelihood of us, any of our departments taking that out in time of disaster is probably not going to happen. And so something that is more useful that we would actually use is important. So so I'm undergoing that right now within my county, and I think that if a county is on top of that, working with the state, they'll have those resources and templates available to start kind of redeveloping what's been in place over all the years.
What are your key priorities as an emergency manager?
My key priorities are to help preserve life and property of the residents of the county. That's number one. And from a office standpoint, with my current position, is to just keep building upon what we already have for our emergency operations center, and kind of just keep advancing it. There's always more to be done. And I just want to keep developing it.
Have you written any grants? Can you detail a grant writing success to enrich emergency management services?
Yes, so the state has many grants. There's tons of grants, emergency management. We successfully did a grant for 800 megahertz radios through the schools for Presque. working with Presque Electric Foundation, Community First Foundation, I think they're called. So we were able to put 800 megahertz radios and desktop systems in place in all the schools that directly connect with our 911 dispatch. And so there's that direct communication. And so it was a grant process, and then it was an implementation process and a training process. And so there's always something going on in emergency management. Your county may not have participated, but there is it's called HMEP, and it's Hazardous Mitigation Emergency Preparedness Grant. So with your tier 2 facilities in your county that have that threshold of hazardous materials, the county can apply for grant money, and Presque County has applied for that grant money in the past. It has to go through the LEPC group, but they'll get money to implement that reporting, that annual reporting that companies have to do. In the olden days, and Presque County was still stuck in the olden days, people would submit a report in the mail. This grant gives you $500 and it allows you to do everything electronically, which the companies out there appreciate because they can just get on and do it electronically now. And then the reports go to the fire chiefs automatically, and then they come to the emergency services. So that also provides funding to help redo those plans every year. So I think it's like $1,200 or something they may get for a plan. So it's not a huge chunk of money, but it helps get the county and get things moving with the county when it comes to hazard mitigation. We just recently accepted $72,000, and that grant comes through my office for the generators that I'm not sure if you guys are working on probably. But there's a lot of steps throughout that process with resolutions, what else? Public hearings that have to take place, getting the information on the grants, the budgeting stuff. So yeah, so grants are kind of an everyday thing. They do take a lot of time away from your everyday work, but it's just a process. So I do those types of things a lot.
How do you stay up to date with the latest developments in emergency management?
Well, being involved in the region with the regional emergency managers is key. We meet on a monthly basis. We talk to each other probably daily, if not weekly, with emergency managers throughout our region. And we get a lot of information at that meeting. And I'm also on the executive board of that group. And so I get to meet with the other directors. There's 4 of us. And so we meet, in addition to those meetings, we do a lot of planning from the executive board standpoint. So participating in the conferences that unfold throughout the county or throughout the state, training throughout the state, exercising with our neighboring counties. I do that a lot. I'm sure with your county, doing exercises can be challenging sometimes, again, because you're working with a lot of volunteer departments. And so we find in Presque, we partner a lot with Alpena County or Sheboygan County doing exercises because sometimes they have the ability to do a lot more exercises that we might not be able to do. So.
How do you approach post-incident analysis and reporting?
While doing after action meetings, debriefings, we are going to be doing one this Friday regarding the ice storm. The sooner you can do them to the end of the incident, which our incident hasn't ended yet, but the sooner when things get back to normal, the better, because when people start getting back to their daily lives, we have a tendency to kind of forget what happened. And so we're doing ours Friday. It's a little later, but it was hard to get it scheduled with folks when you're getting a whole bunch of people together. But it's essential with an incident like this, or even a local incident with law enforcement. I'm sure they do a lot of debriefings from different incidents too, but they're very, very important to talk about what did you do well? What were the lessons learned, to get some community support and buy-in. We're also creating a, volunteer organizations assisting in disaster group in our county that is specific to shelters. And so that is another debriefing kind of after action that we're doing with volunteer organizations throughout the county. Because that's another important dynamic of post-incident capturing that stuff. So, yeah, and then most certainly typing it all up and having a document that when something happens again, you can look back to see, did we follow what we learned, or do we still need to learn a little bit more about what we did? So I think that's all important.
How do you measure community resilience post-disaster?
Well, I think lessons learned, getting new processes and programs and things in place. Who would have thought if we had shelters in place throughout a county, and now you have no power, and so you have no shelters because you have no power at any of your shelters. So I think the lessons learned is huge, and sharing that with the public. So when we run into situations like we may have, that it doesn't happen again.
I know we had some issues here talking about shelters for people. What about animals? We had a lot of issues with people not wanting to leave because
Yes.
of their animals.
Yes, we most certainly had that issue too, and it broke my heart because I understand, if you have to leave your pets in the freezing cold and you don't know how long you're going to be gone. So I haven't come up with a solution, but I'm actually meeting with Michelle Reed, the animal control officer in Alpena. I think she's a wealth of knowledge, and I kind of have pricked her brain a little bit to do some planning on how we deal with this in the future. Because that's very, very important. And most of our shelters, we kind of change shelters, but you may start at a township hall and you may end at one of your public schools, and well, neither one of them want pets, animals in their facilities. So we do need to come up with a plan. And so I hope Michelle has some ideas for me.
How do you measure the effectiveness of your emergency management efforts? And how do you incorporate lessons learned from past incidents into future emergency management plans?
Well, your emergency plans need to be fluid. They're ever changing. And so every time you have a disaster and you have your lessons learned, you need to go back to your plans and you need to adjust. They're constantly going to be being readjusted based on things that you've learned or things that have happened. So the plans are the plans, but they should always be changing from every lesson learned.
And then in what ways do you incorporate community feedback into emergency preparedness plan?
Well, I think having folks involved in the LPT meetings, and having surveys available for folks. I know with the hazard mitigation plan that the county had approved in the last year or so, there's a lot of community input that's needed. Probably we don't get enough community input, but we need to have ways to connect with folks, whether it be at festivals, whether it be Friday folders within the schools or anything of that nature. But there's got to be a way for us to educate and get information from the community members.
I do like that with the schools, because a lot of times if you send that home with the kids, the parents are good. If they don't have the good internet or communications, they're not going to get that.
Right.
And I think that was it for questions.
Just mirrored, we missed question 21.
Which metric do you use
Oh.
to evaluate the effectiveness of an emergency response plan?
Well, I think doing the after action meetings, the debriefings, we really can learn what things went well and what things didn't go so well. And I think, I guess I don't plan to measure them on a scale of 1 to 5, being, 5 being the best, 1 not so good, but I've never really looked into how to measure per se. But I think when we get all the first responders and community members together and we look at what went well and what didn't go so well, I think we can have a good measurement of the successes of the event, and most certainly hope that we did some things well.
Okay, that's included. Do you have anything that you would like to ask us?
I don't.
Okay.
I have one question.
Oh,
Sure.
If you received the job, would you have plans of moving to Montmorency County?
I would not. So I'm right on the border of Alpena and Presque Isle County. So I'm about, well, I drive about 40 minutes to work to Rogers City every day, so it'd be about the same from there to here. So, yep. Anything
Thanks,
else?
Sarah.
Yeah, no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll get in touch with you.
Okay, sounds good.
I do have one question.
Sure.
So you said that you were very close to having your test for emergency manager.
Yes.
Did you? were you-
Well, I was scheduled to take it next week, but found out that the class, the public information officer class that I have, I had to take the test by last October, so now I have to take 2 more classes. I know, they're changing all of the criteria, and so I'm taking the public information courses the first week of August, so then I can test in September.
Okay. So
So-
you're with. And the.
Yeah, I was hoping I was gonna be done next week, but not
Okay.
so much. So yeah, so hopefully September I'll get to take that exam, and so, all
Thank you.
right, thank you. See ya.
Good seeing you.
I thought I skipped one. I'm thinking. Thank you.
Next up is Jonathan Chapman. Bring him in.
Can we hold on really quick and let's finish?
Do you want to review all of them afterwards? Because these guys have already been on hold now for
Right.
4 minutes.
Yeah.
Did you say Jonathan Chadwick?
Jonathan Chapman. Hi, John.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you.
You guys want to introduce yourselves so you know what you're talking to? Oh, you're not coming up on the camera. Switch again. There you go.
Bobby Brent, County Commissioner, District 2.
Hi, Michelle Rose, District 4, representing Lewiston.
Mary Hardees, Board Chair, District 1. Just introduce yourself.
Lloyd Peltier,
Michelle Hamlin, District 5.
I'm April Williamson.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And continue. You asked me a few questions and then go down the line. What are your expectations for developing Montmorency County EM program?
So I think, the number one priorities for me are going to be establishing relationships, making sure that all of the organizations in the county are on the same page, communicating effectively and working together. And then I think the other thing is to plan for, the top events. As all emergency managers do, identify what the big risks are, but reevaluate that. So develop a plan to revisit that on occasion. I think right now it's a perfect example with, the ice storm having just passed, coming up down the road, you're going to see things that you wouldn't normally see in the area. Power outages and just personal injury from falling limbs and debris still. And then, just the idea that I think there's an increased risk for fire. And establishing what that communication plan looks like. And then I think the other big thing moving forward is to just make sure you have good mutual aid and that you're working with the agencies, not only in the communities in the county, but in the communities in the surrounding counties as well, to provide support and get support when needed.
All right, and what made you choose to apply to Montmorency County?
And so one of the things that is appealing to me is, obviously it's a beautiful part of the state. I'm also, have made a transition for myself from the world of education, where I spent, over 2 decades, almost 3 decades working, and just made a decision that this was an area that I wanted to work in, and but also the kind of communities that I want to work with. You can make decisions about, do you want to work in the big city or very populated urban areas, and I grew up in the country, and it's the right setting for me, and I think also the right size environment of all the organizations involved.
All right. What are your strengths and weaknesses as an emergency manager?
Yeah, so I think the two weaknesses that I think jump out to me are that, number one, I just don't have experience as an emergency manager in a formal role. I have a lot of practical experience. I've done a lot of work in disaster response and recovery and mitigation, but I've never sat the seat. So, I'm just at a transitional point in my life where I think that I have a skill set coming out of the world of education, and over the past 5 or 6 years, doing the work that I've been doing, but I don't have that true experience sitting the seat. The other thing that I've been trying really hard to work on throughout my career is just work-life balance. I find it hard sometimes to recognize that I'm not taking care of myself, and I think in roles like this, when you look at the burnout among EMs and just the stress that's involved in the position, when stressful events happen, you have to have a plan to take care of yourself in the process as well. As far as my strengths go, I have a huge background throughout the course of my life in planning and organizational planning and teaching, working with communities and collaboration with community members, dealing with difficult individuals. I think I'm a really good public speaker. And I have a strong understanding of how to read policy and implement policy. So I think all those things fit well into this position.
Can you detail your experience leading evacuation operations?
Yeah, so I've never really had like a large scale evacuation. But as a school administrator and a district level administrator, spent a lot of time planning those things out, looking for difficulties that we would have in that arena, and have actually implemented some of those evacuation plans over the course of my career for some events. I had a large fire at a school once. Have had several threats of violence in schools. One turned out to be an active threat, and taking care of those things. At a smaller scale, I've had some experience doing. Never led a large scale evacuation of any kind. Probably the most recent example that I had is I had to evacuate, leading a group of volunteers providing some response work down in Alabama a couple of years ago. Actually had a tornado come through the area we were in. So I had to leave the facility we were in, but we had planned for that, and kind of set up a plan for, we knew storms were coming. If we have to do this is how it's going to go, and discuss that plan. And as it turned out, we had to implement the plan, and it worked out pretty well because we'd gone through it with everyone. So.
All right. What is your experience with other government agencies, emergency services, nonprofit organizations, and community relations?
Okay, so I've worked pretty heavily with a nonprofit that does disaster response. As a paid staff member, my work is more contractual. When there are responses, I go. So I do a lot of teaching in the area of incident command with folks as it applies to our organization. So pretty extensive experience working in logistics and planning and operations, and also as kind of the incident commander and leader of those activities. But also in the fundraising component of it. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to be heading down to Ford to work with some folks at Ford who are a major contributor to the organization that I work with, to do some teaching and just idea sharing with them. So I'm really comfortable working in those environments. I've worked with community agencies pretty much my whole life, especially when it comes to like the county level and state level government agencies. with the Department of Education, but also, for example, community mental health and organizations like that, and helping students in the organization. I feel like there's a group that you mentioned that haven't addressed yet.
Not sure what that would be.
So expanding a little bit on the first question, if you were hired, what would your most immediate steps be when you are hired? And then what would this role look like to you in the first 3 months, 6 months, and year?
Yeah, so I'm correct in this. This is a new position, right? As far as having someone in place full time to do this position. So I think that my first steps would be building relationships, meeting with police and fire and EMS, and establishing solid relationships with those first responders, but also working with this group to develop a vision for where do we want this position to go and the program of the office to go. I think that working in government, that's extremely important to make sure everyone's on the same page. So establishing that vision and also developing relationships. Then I think jumping into one of the things I noticed, I think, is the hazard mitigation plan is coming up due pretty quickly. So jumping into that and revisiting that and starting to work and preparing that for submission. And I think that goes a long way into establishing what the needs of the communities in the county are. So the work that goes into putting that plan together kind of identifies where the strengths and weaknesses are in the community, what the potential hazards are, and the priorities. And I think working with the local agencies to define what that means for them, as well as the community, you kind of find what your focus should be and going about it that way. And to break things down even further, like it might be different for the northern part of the county or the southern part of the county based on what's going on there, what industry is there, what the needs of the different areas of the county are. But working with all those groups to establish where should our focus and priority be, and then finding ways to implement some plans to be prepared in the instance that we need to be. I think one of the other things that would be important to me, obviously, when I look at an area, like this county, is that I think school safety is a huge issue. And as I look back on my career as an educator, I wish we would have been more involved in every single district that I worked in with our first responders and agencies. So, I think I would try to help facilitate some of that communication. And obviously I have a recent background working in a school safety environment with a state agency. So just become really aware of some shortfalls in school districts across the country.
What role does technology play in modern emergency management, and have you implemented any innovative technologies or methods to enhance disaster preparedness?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's incredibly important to use the technology available. There's so many different things that you can use, and for monitoring, for planning, fire hazards, weather hazards, especially, are becoming very technology based, and the amount of early warning that we can give to folks via those technologies is incredible. I've not, had the opportunity. I've not been in roles to use things like the Web EOC and those types of programs. But and talking to the people that I know that have, I am really impressed with the capabilities. One of the things I have been able to do recently is to just change the way we use technology and the response organization that I work with right now. We've become really focused on implementing some technology resources that allow us to just become more efficient in the way we go about our planning, on a daily basis, allocating resources, both physical and people resources, and planning out work and using technology to do that. And so we've kind of been on that from the ground level, not so much on the technology creation side, but on the user side, and providing feedback and having an opportunity to use that software to make our work more efficient.
Can you illustrate a situation where you successfully adapted an emergency plan mid-crisis?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of years ago, I was down in Florida doing a hurricane response, and we had a second hurricane come through. And at the time, I was working in the logistics side of things, but we had about 200 people that we were managing as an organization, and about 100 vehicles and trailers and pieces of equipment of large size. And so we were working, but also tracking another storm coming into us, and how we were going to do that. So for about the 5 or 6 days prior to the storm arriving, we were tracking it and writing our plan and revising our plan every day. And the storm kind of took a turn at the last minute, and we had to adjust our plan and make decisions about what equipment were we going to leave behind, and how are we going to get people, in this case, north and inland, efficiently and effectively and in a safe manner, along with all of the other folks that were heading in that direction. So just the constant looking for information and making the best educated decisions at the ground level on the time, because it's easy for folks to sit back in Houston is where our higher level operations folks were, but we kind of had that information on the ground about what do the roads really look like and what does the weather really look like here. So sharing that information and making decisions based on real-time information, we're able to adapt our plan and be successful in that.
What steps would you take in emergency planning to protect the most vulnerable in the community during an emergency?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you have to do is identify who those community members are, and make sure that you have solid information that you update on a regular basis, whether you're talking about individuals with disabilities or the elderly, or doesn't matter what the vulnerability is, knowing who they are, what their vulnerabilities are and where they are and what the best way to communicate with them is, and keeping that list updated. And then if it looks like you have some warning that an event is coming, whether it's weather or potential fire or things like that, making sure you reach out in multiple avenues to communicate that with them, whether it's through technology or automated phone calls, or having people go out, rallying volunteers to go just do kind of welfare checks, knock on the door and say, hey, we have this potential, and then as the event unfolds, if needed, follow up on that and make sure that you're addressing those needs with the people in the community that are vulnerable. And I think even at a most basic level, planning in the future, or planning now for the future, to have neighborhood watches for your community members, that yes, we know this is coming, please check on your community members, because in the case of most recently the ice storm, it's not necessarily possible to get emergency vehicles down roads and check on people, but if you can connect with in a way to have neighbors checking on neighbors and making sure everyone's taken care of, you can prioritize where you need to be.
How do you conduct risk assessments in rural areas, and how do you maintain up-to-date knowledge of what emerging threats and risks would be?
Yeah, so I think that no matter what your environment, there are unique risks involved. So I think you just establish a procedure for how are we going to do risk assessments and who's going to be involved, and make sure you choose the right people to do those those risk assessments. So I think in making sure that you involve someone from the sheriff's department and local police forces, certainly folks from fire and the medical community and public health, and sit down and come up with a very clear mapped out strategy for what are we looking for, what are the potential risks in this area, and then finding ways to mitigate those, or develop plans for in the event something happens, that you have a solid plan in place. I think the other important thing is to not just rely on the professionals, but talk to the community members, talk to the farmers and the business owners about what's really going on in their community and their businesses, to make sure you have a good understanding of truly what's there, and that you're able to support them. I think a great example of a failure of this was a couple of years ago down in Macomb County, in Clinton Township, where the factory or the warehouse caught on fire and had all kinds of explosives and chemicals in the warehouse that no one knew about, other than the owners, and it caused a few fatalities and certainly created a dangerous situation for the first responders. So just making sure things like that don't happen too, through solid communication and talking to folks. And when I look at a rural county, you can't just follow the template that everyone else uses, because things are different. The big risk factors there aren't necessarily the large industrial accidents. They're not those types of things. It's more about weather and wind and fire and some kind of a mass casualty event, or a significant car accident. So you have to stay in tune with what the true needs of the community are, and not just follow the cookie cutter template.
What are the biggest challenges in implementing a mass notification system?
Number one, making sure you have a solid database of people that need to be notified, and ensuring you use a couple of different strategies, whether it's email or like a landline telephone or cell phone. But finding that good database of information, I think, is the most important piece. I think the other thing is that when you have some communities where a lot of people travel to that area for weekend trips, and for a week or two in the summer, which is when some of the significant wind events happen. How do you get in touch with those folks? How do you notify the campgrounds? How do you share information with people who might be kind of transient to the area or not full-time residents? And then I think the other thing with mass notification systems is to make sure you use them enough that you're getting the right information out to folks, but also not so much that it just becomes something that you ignore. And that's truly a challenge. And I think the other thing that you have to find to work with that is like, what's going to be our secondary notification system to let people know, there's a fire risk this week, but you don't necessarily want to send that out in a mass notification that's also going to alarm some folks. So, finding that balance as well.
What protocols do you follow when dealing with hazardous materials? What's your?
Yeah, so I've been kind of on the lower end of that, working in school districts in particular, making sure that where the hazardous materials are, I think, is the key. And there's always going to be stuff that surprises you. So I think working with particularly fire and EMS to make sure that they have the resources they need, and find ways to provide them with the training that they need, knowing who your mutual aid contacts are, and never being afraid to reach up to the next level. So if there's a situation, I would always want to err on the side of caution that, locally, school district, don't let your maintenance people deal with that. Reach out to the fire department and have them come take a look. And if the fire department isn't sure, then you take that up to the next level, to the county or the state level, to make sure that we're dealing with things appropriately and quickly, so that we don't end up with a larger problem on our hand. I would much rather err on the side of caution, and go that way. But trying to always figure out where your hazardous materials are and what the MSDS and all the information is provided, and it's readily available, so that people know where to find it when they need it.
This is a two-part question. What is your process for training staff and volunteers to work in an emergency readiness situation, and also developing those LEPT and LEPC groups that are more specific to emergency?
Yeah, so I think that the first part in the training is to make sure you provide relevant training, but also at a level that is understandable for everyone. One of the things that when I look back to my time in education was that, and I'm going to add another component to that in a second, but train people at the level they understand. So one of the things I've always tried to do is avoid using a lot of jargon and trade lingo, because not everyone understands that, and not everyone's going to reach out and say, "Hey, I don't even know what that means." And so, making sure your training reaches people at the level they're at, making sure it's relevant, making sure that you tell people why you're doing the training that you are, even if it doesn't seem relevant, and finding people who are willing to be the experts in that area, and make sure you provide them with the training so that they can come back and train other people. The other thing is, I think it's really important to build a network, so that you're not the person that's doing all of the training, because you can't be an expert in everything. You have to find people who are those experts and lend your expertise to them when they need someone, but also bring them in to be the expert when you need that. And the best example I can think of in that is, when I was a principal, I knew what good teaching looked like. I knew what good instruction looked like, but I had no business trying to teach calculus or physics, because it's just not my thing. But I knew when I walked into a classroom what that good teaching looked like, that students were engaged, that they were providing feedback to their teachers. So I think that goes into training adults as well, and response activities. And I think when you're trying to build your groups, you find people that have an interest, and you find out what that interest is, and you take that and you kind of pair it with where their skill set is. You don't want people with poor communication skills being people that are going out to the community and working directly with the community on things, but there are roles they can perform, and the people that do have great communication skills, you steer them in the direction that their strengths lie. And I think what we find in communities is there are a lot of people who have very strong skill sets that we don't even know about until we start digging a little bit. So finding people with the interest, and putting them in the right place. And if you have gaps in what you need, reaching out to the community as a whole and saying, "Hey, we're looking for people with this skill set that we can provide training to." A good example would be storm spotting. We need storm spotters, and this is what it entails. And make it a fun training event, and make it a community event, and then recognize those people for stepping up at every opportunity, whether it's 4th of July parade or Memorial Day or things like that. Making sure you recognize the volunteers that are stepping up to lead the community.
What is your strategy for managing supply chain and mass electrical grid outage disruptions during emergencies?
Yeah, so I think, again, you need to do, I think, two directions with this. Number one, you need to build relationships with, the power companies, to be able to communicate back and forth. Number one, to share with them information that you have about where power outages are, or where you see potential for issues, especially now, when you have, say, your sheriff's department driving around and they can spot the trees that are up, have broken branches up high over power lines, figuring out where that is and just documenting it so that you can share that information up with the power companies. I think the other thing that's important is, establishing a network and procedure for folks, especially in the more rural areas, to share information about power outages and when they occur, and help get that information to the people that can fix it. But then also establishing a procedure that is effective for sharing back when estimated repair times are, and those types of things. The other thing that I think is really important is, again, going back and finding, building your network, your database of folks that, if it's 95 degrees and the power goes out, how are we going to establish some cooling centers or get water to folks, or make sure that their basic needs are met during a power outage? The same would apply to, a wintertime outage. How do we get people, possibly on, roads that are hard to navigate in the winter already, to a place where, they're safe and protected during a power outage? So, number one, how do we communicate where those facilities are? How do we reach the people? How do we know who those folks are? And then, building the community partnerships to be able to do that. How do we work with the American Legion Hall? How do we work with, the church, or the business that actually has a facility that can help house people, or the school districts to, open up their gym space so that we can house people who maybe are without, power for an extended period of time. And then, reaching out again to the state resources to make sure that we're we're gathering all of the assistance that we can from those entities as well. And then I think, kind of another overarching theme is how do you build a network of community-based service organizations that are willing to help, whether it's, like I said, the American Legions or the church and faith-based groups, the Boy Scouts. How do you bring all those folks together to develop a strong network of people that can help during times of crisis?
Can you share an experience with public communication during an emergency, especially maybe during power outages or something, or cell outages, things that would make communication more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly have not had an opportunity to do something on that level because I've not sat in a role where that was my my role. I've done that on a very small scale in school buildings and district wide when we've had power outages and communication issues, but nothing on a larger scale.
Okay. What's your strategy for coordinating with local, state, and federal agencies during a disaster?
So I think, number one, all that work starts well before an event happens. So making sure, number one, that, I'm in strong communication with all the neighboring counties and their agencies, and that, we have policy and procedure in place of how we're going to go about doing that. So we don't have, multiple people, the sheriff's office and fire all reaching out to the same person. But also, just developing that process for what it's going to look like when we open up an emergency operations center. And what do we do when we're doing that along with neighboring counties, and how do we support each other? And again, building relationships with folks at the regional level or the county level, whether it's state police or DNR, National Guard, our politicians. How do we reach out to those folks and build strong networks of communication during blue sky events in order to be ready for when something happens, in a gray sky or an emergency event?
Thank you.
During a crisis, how do you prioritize your resources and your personnel?
Yeah, so for me, it's always about, what can I do to make people safe quickly? And in that response, do everything we can to identify, number one, what the crisis is in reality versus what do we hear it is. So, verify that the event is happening and what it is, and then mobilize the right people, which again comes from planning, in time periods well ahead of events. And then, making sure that the people that you're asking to respond are safe. You don't ever want to respond to a disaster by creating another disaster. So how can we safely reach people and let them know that the event is happening, and then identify where the people are, who the people are that need assistance, and provide them that, immediate assistance in a timely fashion. So, in the event that just, an example that it was a fire, let's get everyone we can out of the path of the fire and make sure they're safe, and then start doing the things we can to address the issue. If it's a wind event, let's go to the places where we know there was damage and make sure that, people are safe, that people get medical attention if they need it, that we can help, start defining what providing them shelter and resources looks like. And, then get to the recovery stages, but, make sure you're responding in a safe way, and, practicing and going through your exercises, your scaled exercises and your tabletop exercises, and just having all those discussions ahead of time.
How would you approach developing an all hazards emergency management plan?
So, I think it's very natural for folks to, I sat back and I kind of looked at what do I think the hazards are in the area. But it's not something that can be done in a silo. It's not something that can be done in isolation. So we want to bring the right people together, the right community members together, the right elected officials together, and the community leaders. But also, like I said, the sheriff's department, the fire, people from the state level when needed, and, look at what do we know our hazards are in the area? And I think it's important to go back and look at historical data too. We can identify all of the hazards that are out there, but the likelihood of having an earthquake is very small. So we don't need to do a lot of planning for that. We need to talk about it a little bit, but we don't need to have a strong plan. But what are the things that are frequent to the area? The ice storms, the snowstorms, wind. Now, like I said, I think fire hazards are gonna move up that list. But that's not a decision for one person to make. I think it's a community effort. So you bring the right people together. You have a look at historical data. You look at where things are now in the moment, and then you start developing what that plan looks like to identify, the 3, 4, 5, 10 things that might be the most important. And that number fluctuates, over time, because some years you're not going to have a high risk of fire because it's very wet. Other years, it's going to be dry and you have a lot of, tree damage from a storm. So building that community relationship and bringing the right people together, putting them in the room together, and taking the time to establish, a process and a procedure and follow it through. And, I think that one of the things that becomes very important, and I saw this a lot in educational planning, is emphasizing how important it is to have a solid plan that everyone contributes to. And it's not just, an exercise in doing the paperwork, but really sitting down and talking to things and visiting with people and taking drives around and going and visiting sites to see what the true answer is with your eyes, instead of just thinking what you're talking about.
What are your key priorities as an emergency manager?
So I think the top 3 for me are going to be communication, making sure that you establish strong communication with all of the organizations and people that need to be involved. And, that goes a long way. It goes into the actual response activities and, the mitigation and recovery, but also, just communicating with what plans are and what responses are to the community, and making sure you have a strong communication plan across the board, especially when it's working very well, but also when things aren't going very well and communication becomes a struggle. I think the other thing for me that becomes very important is, like we just talked about, implementing a plan, making sure you identify what the hazards are, and finding ways to address that. But then sharing that out with the right people so that the right people know what it is. And everyone doesn't need to know all the details, but, sharing the information in that plan at every opportunity with folks so they know what happens when a certain type of event happens and why things happen the way they do. And then I think just that continued community outreach and education, and making sure that it's time specific, time sensitive, that, as fall rolls around, we start talking about winter activities and, whatever those are. And you can, within each type of hazard, there are dozens of hazards. So whether you're out snowmobiling and you fall through ice, what happens and what do you do? Or you lose power, or, you don't have transportation access.
Have you written any grants, and can you detail a grant writing success to enrich emergency management services?
Yep. Grant for emergency management, written, multiple grants. And, I think, again, you focus on, what's your need, and then you go out and you try to find the resources that can support that need. I've seen a lot of people go out and look for grants that are out there and try to figure out how they can apply them to what they're trying to do. But I think for me, it's a better option to, this is what my need is, find the resources that help me reach that end, the appropriate way, and focusing on what's there to help me meet the need that I have, rather than trying to find a resource that I can apply to it somehow.
And how do you stay up to date with the latest developments in emergency management?
So, I think 3 ways. For me, number one is I read all the time. I read several journals. I'm always, looking at websites and blogs and things like that. I communicate and network. I talk to folks as much as I can about, what's going on in their areas and how they're going about things, and have developed management. And so just try to engage them as much as possible. And I'm always on the lookout for professional development opportunities that I think can help me better the things that I do. The state of Michigan offers quite a lot. FEMA currently offers quite a lot, and have worked just in some of my roles with some other organizations. Try to take every bit of training I can just to be a little bit better. And you never know when you're going to be able to use something. So at every opportunity, if I see something that I think could be useful down the line, I try to work and take some training.
Which metrics do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of an emergency response plan?
Yeah, so I'm a data person. I really think data goes a long way to showing your successes and weaknesses. So for me, with an emergency response plan, number one, how accurate was our information early on, and how did we share information? So just, accuracy is a huge thing to me. Response time is another metric that I think is really important. One of the other things that I think, in the after action area is that, how effective was our training? Did we train people in the right areas? And did they find that training in retrospect to be effective to what we needed it to be? And if it wasn't, why not? And then, I think the other areas important are, financial. How much did this effort cost us? But also how much, loss was there involved? And, what are the efficiencies and things that we can improve on there as well? And then I think, the safety piece of it is also important, injury, loss of life.
How do you approach post-incident analysis and reporting?
Yeah, so I think that, one of the things that you have to do in after action reporting is give people time to process, let them know there's going to be, this post-incident reflection, give some talking points that are relevant to whatever the event was, but then come together and really talk about from start to finish how things went, and make it a safe space. And if you're in a room full of people that all responded in some way, finding out what they thought went well and what didn't go well from their unique roles, whether it's police, fire, community, and the making it a safe space that everyone can speak freely to talk about what went well and what didn't go well, not necessarily with critique, but just identify those things that we fell short on, and make sure that we can ensure that doesn't happen again in the future, and plan for better responses.
How do you measure community resilience post-disaster?
Yeah, I think one of the best ways, it's hard to quantify sometimes, but I think you look at the number of people who were impacted by something that required a response, and compare that to the number of people that came to support, and the number of people who provided assistance, whether it was just in hours or if it was in physical resources, taking people into their homes or providing food, water, and meals, and how many volunteer organizations came to help, and how did you communicate that information with them to make them aware of what that need was. And at the end of the day, post event, whatever your timeline is, how well did we respond and help each other in the community, and what are our outstanding resources after a period of time that we didn't meet the needs of the community, and then figure out why not.
How do you measure the effectiveness of your emergency management efforts, and how do you incorporate lessons learned from past incidents into future emergency management plans?
So, one of the things that I think is unique about emergency management planning is, if you do it well, you don't know necessarily what you prevented or what impacts you had. That, you know, if you develop a good plan and you have good communication and you teach people how to do things the right way in the prevention stages, sometimes you can't quantify that. You can't identify any metrics with that because you stopped it from happening because people were aware and they were educated. So I think that the one thing that you can focus on is, did we see a decrease from, let's just say, you know, July 2025 to July 2027 in a specific type of incident? And what were the other factors that we can try to look at, whether they were weather related or, you know, whatever the metric was, but did we see a decrease? And I think if you see decreases in areas where you put an emphasis on education and prevention and mitigation, then that's a win. That's a success story. And it becomes very hard sometimes to quantify whether, you know, that was good emergency planning or some other factor, but you do your best to decide that. So, you know, I think that's one of the things that you look at. There's a second part of that question, and I forgot what it was. I'm sorry.
How do you incorporate lessons learned from past incidents into future emergency management plans?
Yeah, thank you. I think that, you know, the best way to do that is to have a solid after action review, and to sit down with people that were involved from every aspect, and talk openly and freely about what went well and what didn't go so well. And then, you know, establishing how do we maintain the things that went well? Was that something that we did in planning and preparation that, you know, really covered the bases, or was it just something we got lucky on? And how do we make sure that luck continues? How do we plan so that it's not luck the next time? It's actually a part of our plan. And then, you know, the other piece is acknowledge when things didn't go well, because not everything is going to go the way that you want it to. And even if it didn't turn out poorly, but it didn't go the way you wanted it to, you have to account for that and talk freely about it. And again, not necessarily point blame or focus in a department or a person, but just find ways to ensure that, you know, something doesn't happen like that again, and move forward. And that might be that we didn't have proper training. It might be that we didn't have the right resources, or it was just an unforeseen event that happened that now in the future we know is coming down the road. So I think you just take, you know, everything you can learn from an event and prepare to be better the next time around.
In what ways do you incorporate community feedback into emergency preparedness plans?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, that goes back to the communication side of things. You have to provide an avenue for your community members to communicate freely with emergency management. They need to be able to share their opinions, and they need to be able to share frustrations they've had, but also success stories. They need to be invited to community meetings to talk about planning for specific types of events or the review of the overall plan, and have opportunities to be involved. And, you know, I think that you have to keep really good data on where that information is coming from. If you have whole neighborhoods that are complaining about, you know, a specific thing or several things, you need to find your way into those neighborhoods to communicate with, you know, the community members and the leaders of that community to make sure that you're addressing their needs. And, you know, if you find out you're doing something really well in one neighborhood, find out how you can translate that into support and success for other neighborhoods as well. But, you know, communication is key when it comes to community members, being open and transparent, listening to feedback, and, you know, finding ways to address concerns where they're warranted is extremely important in emergency management.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll ask the same question. If selected, would you be willing to move to Montmorency County?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
And are you considered a certified, do you have certification in emergency management?
Yeah, I've not done that yet. I've been working on that. There's a couple more tasks that I have to complete in order to get there.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think I'm less than a year away. It's just finding the opportunities to do some of the more larger tasks like the exercise and training events.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
Do you have any questions for us?
So, having gone through, and talked about a lot of things, what from your group's perspective would be, and I'm just going to ask maybe the two big ones and sit back and let, members answer. What's the biggest challenge for someone coming into this role? And what is your both short-term and long-term goal for this role and what it becomes over the next couple of years?
Our program we really need to implement some of the very basics, get the meetings, the collaborative meetings with our community partners going. Through the ice storm, I was the acting EM, but of course I'm not an EM, I'm the board chair. So we need somebody actively in that role in developing those collaborations and making sure our plans are what they need to be for the situations we are facing. And you're right, fire is a concern. Did I not answer something you had asked?
No, that was fine. I was just kind of pausing to see if anyone else was gonna answer as well. And then, so what do you think moving forward, the biggest challenge for the person coming into this role?
Coordination among the various groups, I would say.
Yeah.
I think because we've had a part-time EM in past years, and EMs that I've spoken to say that it's not a part-time job, so it's been difficult for anybody to give the job the attention it needs. So it's not like we had a great EM that was full-time and was doing everything that needed to get done, and now we're just, moving on to a new person. This is where we really just haven't had a full-time position with the ability to give it the attention that it deserves and needs.
Right.
So I think the challenge is just picking up the pieces of what we do have and finding the pieces that we don't have and putting it all together.
Yeah, developing a more robust.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, I guess my last question would be, what are your next steps, just so I can know in my mind?
So they're gonna review the rest of the candidates, and then I will be in touch with you as soon as I have some responses from the rest of today's meeting.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, does anyone want to take a quick break before I have the next person come in?
I'm sorry.
Okay, all right.
All right, next one is Rhonda.
Good afternoon.
Hello. We're going to start with asking some questions. We're just going to all, we can introduce ourselves, yeah.
Bob DeBrent, District 2 Commissioner.
Michelle Rose, District 4, Lewiston area.
Mary Hardees, District 1 Board Chair.
Lloyd Peltier, District 3.
Michelle Ham, District 5.
I'm April Williamson.
I apologize if you can hear my dog in the background. He has a lot of feelings. He won't stop either. So I, again, apologize. He really isn't mistreated. He just makes it sound that way.
And the first question is, what are your expectations for developing Montmorency's EM program?
Well, it looks like you have a pretty robust hazard mitigation plan. I think there are probably some things that can be projects that can be developed based on that. Distraction. He really has been quiet all day until now. So anyway, so that's where it starts really. Mitigation and preparedness is where where emergency management starts. I am active in an emergency management or emergency preparedness program called Do One Thing. I'm one of the founders of that program. It's a pretty easy way, since it's a completely online program, to promote preparedness at fairs and things like that, at outreach events. So that's a good start on preparedness, if there isn't a program in place already. But ahead of time, I think that that's the most important thing. Preparedness, mitigation, to start to get the ball rolling on reducing risk, though Montmorency is in a really high risk area, which is nice. And then from there to really look at what's been done already for for training and preparing EOC staff for their response, and to sort of look at what's already in place there and build on that. I'm a competent trainer, so any training that needs to be done. I was the exercise coordinator for the city of Lansing for a very long time. So I've developed, drills, tabletop exercises, full scale exercises. So I'm comfortable with that. But getting ready for the activation, emergency management is a machine, and the emergency manager isn't the person who runs that machine when a disaster happens. That's the sheriff, that's the commissioners, that's, the other local officials. And I think that that's really the job of the emergency manager 95% of the time, is keeping that machine maintained and ready to go, and making sure that the people who will be running that machine when the time comes are ready to do that. So that's really the job of the emergency manager.
Right. And what made you choose to apply for Montmorency County, to Montmorency County?
Location. It's the area that my husband and I want to move to. We've lived in Lansing for far longer than we wanted to, than we ever intended to. We have family up in Sheboygan area, and we would like to, head that direction. And Montmorency County looks like, a great place to live.
What are your strengths and weaknesses as an emergency manager?
I think my strengths are knowledge and experience in this. I have an ability to create relationships, and relationships, I think, are the key to emergency management. I'm a strong communicator, so that's also a part of that. Building and maintaining that machine is a big part of that, is making sure that the people who you're going to need when there's a disaster and after a disaster are ready to go and see themselves as part of that process. I think my biggest weakness is really sometimes the tendency to be more practical and abrupt than some people are comfortable with, but that's something that I'm aware of and something that I'm working on. I'm a very practical person. I'm a hands-on person, and I really like to get things done. So it's a skill that I'm working on, that backing up, and thinking about the way I approach things. That's a skill, I'm continuing to develop. But I think that just being too practical sometimes and not spending enough time on the emotional side and the soft skills would be my most serious weakness.
Can you detail your experience in leading evacuation operations?
We haven't had I didn't have the opportunity for a large well, that's not true. We had one of the evacuations that I am thinking of was for a flood in Lansing in, I'm drawing a blank on the year. I think it was 2017. It was a major flood that we had. There were some neighborhoods that had to be evacuated. It was about communication ahead of time to make sure that they knew what was going to happen or what could happen. And I think it's really a matter of being very clear to say, if this happens, then we are going to ask you to do this. Go on. So preparing people ahead of time, talking to people ahead of time, making sure that people aren't hearing about a risk for the first time when it happens, when a wildfire is threatening. I'm sure the people in Montmorency County are familiar with their risk already, but you really want to make sure that they aren't hearing of something for the first time. People have to believe in something's going to happen before they'll trust the people who are telling them it's going to happen. I'm digressing a little bit, I apologize. But I think also making sure that we have relationships ahead of time with the people who will be sheltering, whether that's the Red Cross or the Salvation Army, or if it's the county itself, to make sure that those procedures and those things are in place ahead of time. I guess what I'm saying is that a successful evacuation doesn't happen on that day. It happens going back months and years before that, making sure that the processes and the people who are going to be doing that work are ready to go, and making sure that the people who are going to have to evacuate are ready to do that as well, and willing to do that as well. And being willing really is based in understanding your risk, and being able to reduce uncertainty and answer questions as much as possible. So I think that, to get back to your question, again, digressing, that evacuation is the one that comes to mind. We evacuated a couple of neighborhoods, and worked with the Red Cross. The Red Cross was the one that, did the sheltering for the city, and yeah, it went pretty smoothly. We had a good evacuation. It did go smoothly. Another evacuation that we were on the other end of was Hurricane Katrina, when we had people coming in that we were sheltering, and we were able to mobilize our nonprofits in the city to help with that, help shelter, help get people what they needed. And that's another program that I developed and worked on, was a program with Goodwill that would let people who had evacuated bring in a voucher that the Red Cross issued and managed for us, that they could go to Goodwill and start to get things to replace the things they'd lost in the disaster. Did that answer your question? Would you like more? Did I give you enough specifics, I guess is my question.
Yeah, it sounds like it's okay with me.
Okay.
What is your experience with other government agencies, emergency services, nonprofit organizations, and community relations?
I have a lot of experience. We worked in Lansing, where it was a tri-county. It was a tri-county region. Most services were served that tri-county, Ingham, Eaton, and Clinton counties. So we had to have relationships with the 3 surrounding counties, not just their emergency managers, but their sheriff's departments, their human service departments, their transportation, the bus services that served the area. So we had all of those. I also had good relationships with the state. They were hard to avoid in the capital. We also had relationships with the Corps of Engineers and the USGS, which were really helpful. We contracted with the USGS to do a flood inundation mapper for the city. And we funded that through a public-private partnership. So that was a good experience as well, to talk to the hospitals, to talk to the Board of Water and Light, to talk to all of those organizations that would be infected by flooding, and to get this thing funded. But because of that relationship, the USGS contacted us later and said, your flood maps are wrong. People are in the floodplain who shouldn't be shown in the floodplain. So because of that relationship, we were able to also fund a remapping, a flood study that got, I don't remember how, a couple of hundred people out of the floodplain and out of the flood insurance requirements. So those relationships were very useful there. But again, relationships are so important. The offices on aging, the other human service agencies, the nonprofits that serve a region, you have to have those relationships because you have shared interests. Disaster isn't just an emergency management problem. It's a problem for everybody. And when you're responsible for organizations that are responsible for vulnerable people, you need to have those relationships to make sure that the vulnerable people are getting what they need, whether it's in an evacuation or disaster recovery or in the disaster itself.
Kind of tying back to the first question, if you were hired, what would be your first immediate steps? And then what would you be looking to do the first 3 months and 6 months as you're getting established in the role?
Well, the first thing to do is to meet with the people who will be running that machine, to stick with that analogy, the people who will be in the EOC, to meet with the commissioners, to meet with other local officials, to understand how they see their role in emergency management and what their role has traditionally been. You know, a new emergency manager doesn't need to bring in a new emergency management system if there's nothing wrong with the one that's already in place. So the first step is to understand that role, and understand those processes that have been in place, to get a feel for the disasters that have happened, to familiarize myself with, you know, those programs. And then I think in the short term to start to do some outreach around with those organizations first, that are serving vulnerable people, but to really kind of branch that out, to start internally to get those relationships and understand them, and then to branch out and to start understanding what communities are in Montmorency County, and what their goals are. I really believe that, you know, there's two sides of disaster. One is that disaster undoes the things that communities work for. You know, they can be trying to solve problems, and then suffer a disaster, and all of the work that they've put into solving that problem can be gone. And on the other side of that, you know, hazard mitigation a lot of times can have co-benefits to solving those problems. So if you understand what challenges a community is facing and what's important to them, you can start to help them solve those problems by reducing hazard risk. So I think those two would be the first, you know, the first step, and then the second step would be to start branching out, and then to look at, you know, again, what preparedness programs are in place. Is this a good place to launch, do one thing, or is there another program already in place that we can build up and keep promoting? But to get out into the community too, and start to, you know, find those opportunities to talk to people and find out what their interests are, and talk to communities about what their challenges are and their risks are.
Okay, thank you. What role does technology play in modern emergency management? Have you implemented any innovative technologies or methods to enhance disaster preparedness?
I think that technology is very important, and especially in a rural area, because in the city of Lansing, which is where my experience is, so that's where I keep going back to, there are so many community meetings and so many, you know, opportunities to meet with people who are already getting together to do things. And in rural areas, there's less of that. People aren't automatically going to these, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen in rural areas, but it doesn't happen to the same extent. There's not these ready-made audiences to get out and talk to. So I think technology becomes very important in that way. You know, using the internet in a way that works for the people that you're trying to reach. We also, while I was in Lansing, implemented a couple of just emergency management systems, including the one that the state put out. And it's been 4 years since I've been in local emergency management, so that would be something I would have to refamiliarize myself with as well. But I was a trainer on that state system, so I do have that experience. I also use GIS quite a bit in understanding risks and communicating risks. Maps can communicate a lot to people that you know aren't going to communicate in other ways. So I do think technology, social media, you know, using the internet the way that people are using it. If this is a, you know, Facebook area, then Facebook. If it's Instagram, you know, to be the place where people are online, I think is a way that emergency management can use technology. And then the disaster management side of that is the other piece, that incident management software piece, or the GIS piece that will help us better understand and manage things when they happen.
Can you illustrate a situation where you successfully adapted an emergency plan mid-crisis? I'm trying to remember an incident where we did that. The only thing that comes to mind right now is the time when we refused to adapt, and that was when
We had set up our incident in a specific way in a disaster, and the state called us and asked us to change what we were doing, and I refused to do that because to me, what was happening on the ground and managing the successful incident where we were was more important than literally the state saying, but it's easier for us if you do it the other way. Afterward, we had that conversation. I had a conversation with the state about, what our choice, and they were fine with it. And we, looked at the way we would do it in the future to make it easier for them, understanding that they have a bigger responsibility. But to me, the responsibility of the emergency manager locally, disasters are local, disaster response is local, and managing that event in the way that we're used to managing it and not expecting the people in the EOC to change midstream, I thought was more important. I do think that you do have to be agile in your emergency plans, and your emergency plans need to be flexible enough that they can be used in a variety of situations, that they can be adapted. I think that if you write a good plan, it can be adapted without any issue for whatever incident you're going to you're experiencing at that time.
What steps would you take in emergency planning to protect the most vulnerable in the community during an emergency?
And that goes back to relationships, understanding who's already serving and who has those relationships. If there is an organization that does, it's possible that there's not an organization serving those people already. And in that case, you need to be more direct. But I think that working through existing organizations that already have relationships is really important. In Lansing, we developed a procedure for small complex events. Not every disaster is going to be an EOC evacuation, but in something like there was a mobile home park that had to be evacuated because of a public health issue. There were some senior apartment complexes at different times people had to be relocated from. And I think those events are because they're sort of under the radar of the full EOC evacuation. There's a coordination piece that gets missed. And I think that makes it harder for your partner organizations, the Office on Aging or the health department or whoever else, to make sure that people are getting what they need. So I think that small complex event piece is really important, and that's part of relationship building, so that if something like that happens, the emergency manager can, without that EOC evacuation, can be the one to provide that coordination, to create that space for those organizations to come together and respond to that smaller event, because those smaller events are more common. And anytime that people who are already vulnerable lose that resilience, that they're not just less resilient overall, they're less resilient to disaster, but it also weakens communities when those people are who are already not completely independent or only independent because of the services that they're receiving. They become less resilient if they lose those services, obviously. So I think it's worthwhile for the Emergency Management Office to be engaged at that level.
The next questions, I'm going to combine a couple. How do you conduct risk assessments in rural areas, and how do you maintain up-to-date knowledge of emerging threats and risks?
I think that you need to be involved with, and again, these are things that you do well before the disaster, but to be plugged into the state, to be plugged into your surrounding counties. I think that you need to be involved in the bigger emergency management community to understand emerging risks and to understand emerging resources or changing resources. This is a really uncertain time for emergency management in general, with everything that's happening with FEMA at the federal level, the uncertainty about what's happening with FEMA at the federal level. This is a time that emergency managers need to be plugged in together and plugged in with the state, and to really have those, to make sure that network is strong, so that we understand what's going to happen next. So, and professional organizations are a big part of that too. International Association of Emergency Managers, the Michigan MEMA, and the state organization, and the Association of State Floodplain Managers. Those are all organizations that can that you can get that be aware of what's going on in the world around us. And could you repeat the first part of your question?
How do you conduct risk assessments?
I think you really, one of the things that I've done for the past 4 years, I was working for Michael Baker International and on a contract for FEMA. And one of the things that we were working on was direct technical building profiles of communities that were getting direct technical assistance from FEMA. So, helping to understand those communities, and there's a process for that, for understanding the community, understanding the threats that they're facing. Part of it is engaging with the community directly, of course, but there's also things that you can do. There's a process for, understanding the resources of the community, the concerns of the community, the strategies of the community. And I think that that's it's sometimes more difficult in a rural area because you don't have the same resources. There's not 24/7 media coverage of rural areas, but it's not impossible. And I think that it's just a matter of understanding what's happened in the past, what may happen in the future, but also, engaging with the people who are on the ground there, through surveys or through community meetings. Both of those are really good tools to sort of get a feel for what their concerns are, and let them be part of that risk assessment. I think that the community involvement in risk assessment is really important, not just the responders, but the community in assessing the risk.
Okay. What are the biggest challenges in implementing a mass notification system?
I think there's a technological side to that, but I think there's also a human side to it. You can buy a system. I don't know if Montmorency has a system already, but that system is only, one of the technological challenges, of course, is this everybody switching to mobile phones, which is then people have to sign up, and that takes you back to the human problem. But I think there's that kind of a crossover between the technological problems and human problems. It's just sometimes the fatigue that people get if they get a lot of notifications. So understanding the right level of notifications, when to activate that system and when not to, so that people will be familiar with it, and be willing to sign up for it, but also not be overwhelmed by it, and listen to it when it actually does go off. I think there's an element to good messaging as well. I think that there are I've seen a lot of messages that didn't identify. There are a lot of mistakes you can make with those messages. One of them is not identifying the organization that the message is coming from. We all get a lot of spam on our devices, and making sure that people are able to recognize that important call when it comes through. So again, a lot of technological issues, a lot of things that you can do to make your messages stronger and make them more effective. And then there's also, that human part of getting people to sign up for that mass notification system.
Thank you.
Okay. What protocols do you follow when dealing with hazardous material incidents?
I am going to pass on that question. And I would 100% defer to the responders and what they would do. And I'm not familiar with, it's been a few years since I've been involved with that. I had a job originally that was one of my first jobs with the city of Lansing was developing emergency plans for hazardous materials sites, tier 2 sites. But that was a long time ago. And, again, I would defer to the responders on that. And of course, I would have to familiarize myself with how Montmorency County deals with that. But off the top of my head, I don't have anything helpful for you on that one.
Okay, what is your process for training staff and volunteers for emergency readiness and for developing like local LPT and LEPC committees?
Um, I think that, again, relationships, making sure that people understand why it's important, why these organizations are important. I think also feeding people at meetings is a really good way to get them to come to meetings. And show your appreciation when they come to a meeting, even if it's just a bowl of candy on the table can go a long way, I think, sometimes. But for training, I've developed a lot of training curriculums. We had our own CERT program before FEMA rolled CERT out as a community emergency response team. We had our own curriculum before that because we had our own CERT team. So when FEMA rolled their curriculum out, we adapted to that. But, it was something that we developed based on what we needed locally and understanding that what is specific, what do people need to know when the disaster happens? What's their role? I think that you don't want to give people more information than they need. You're asking for, whether it's in a professional setting or a volunteer setting, you're asking people to set aside what they normally do for this event that may or may not happen in the future. It will happen in the future, but when people think about it, it's this distant possible event, a disaster. So I think that that's it's making it not asking for more than people are able to give, understanding that trade-off of, we're asking you to do something for the future right now. But I think that good training is important and exercises are important. And exercises can be fun. I mean, not, fun in a laughter sort of sense, but they can be interesting and exciting. And I think that, really leaning into that and making it something that challenges people, but also, really prepares them. And that's in developing the curriculum. And that is something that I have done a lot of curriculum development. I've done a lot of training. I was in charge of the disaster or the damage assessment team, among other teams. But I built that team. I built the CERT team, and kept them trained and interested. And that's the biggest problem with volunteers and sometimes with people who are professionally involved as well, is to keep them interested. If you're not ready on, the day before the disaster, you're not going to be ready on the day of the disaster. So that's a challenge, keeping people interested and involved, leading up to something that, they in their minds may or may not happen. But I think that it's just important to respect their time, to give them information that they need and find interesting, and to engage with them in a way that's not dry and boring. Because again, if the disaster's on Tuesday and you're not ready on Monday, you're not going to be, the disaster isn't going to go well.
What is your strategy for managing supply chain issues, especially with maybe electrical grid outages and disruptions during emergencies?
I think that that's something where you really need to partner with the infrastructure providers, whether that's consumers or whoever else. I've had good relationships with consumers in the past. They have emergency managers who are, really willing to engage if you ask them to. So understanding those providers, and, having that relationship where, they're getting what they need as well. But that's really the, and then knowing what the needs will be and having agreements in place ahead of time to make sure that you have those, where those resources can come from, and to have a really good logistics team trained up. So when the time comes, you can implement those purchases as needed. And again, that's something that, is really going to be based in what the county is doing already. Nobody's going to learn a new system when a disaster happens. So how can we use that system that the county already has and has successfully in place? How can we use that effectively in a disaster? If that means that, policies need to be updated, or I'm assuming they already are, but just theoretically, identifying those potential roadblocks ahead of time, to make sure that they're going to, that things will flow smoothly when they're needed in a disaster. And I think relationships are important, making sure that, that those infrastructure providers and the, purchase, all the people that are involved in that supply chain know each other and trust each other. I think is going to be if it's not already in place, would be the important thing.
Okay. Can you share your experience with public communications during emergencies? Especially maybe when cell phone services have been limited?
I think that you need to know where people are getting their information already, like I said. So using those social media networks, using the other communication networks. There are a lot of times other organizations also need to talk to the people they serve. So how are they doing that? So if cell phones aren't available, is there another system that's in place that you can leverage? I apologize. I really do. My husband isn't home and he's just so pathetic. Not my husband, the dog. So yes, I think, those communication networks, understanding the communication networks that exist already, and being able to leverage those in a disaster. And I have completely lost track of your question. I apologize.
Well, that was the question of public, using communications.
Oh, and public communication, and having the press conferences, and having ways to get that information out. TV stations aren't the only communicators anymore, right? There are YouTube channels, and there are other content creators, local content creators that can also be leveraged if they're appropriate for that use, of course. But I have organized press conferences. I have trained public information officers. I've acted as a public information officer. So I've been in all of those roles. I've briefed public officials on, the message and the importance of the message. And, because you are the trusted faces for the people of the county. And you are the ones that a lot of times they may want to hear, or it may be the sheriff, or it may be whoever, but understanding who the person is that should be delivering a message, and making sure that they understand the message, and we're united in the message we're giving. So all of those are important parts of public information. And again, making sure that we understand how information flows and are using the networks that already exist.
Okay. What is your strategy for coordinating with local, state, and federal agencies during a disaster?
Well, the state has their information management system, or their incident management system, and that's going to be, of course, key to communicating with the state. But you also have to have lines open to the surrounding counties, to other organizations. And make sure that you're communicating, and that, at one point, I remember in our emergency operations center in Lansing, we just had a screen up that had the Ingham County Emergency Operations Center. We just had a camera into that, and people could walk up to the screen and talk to other people. And it was just like having a window open between the two. And that was a really effective way in that case, because there was just one other organization. But, taking advantage of video calls, taking advantage of the technology that we have. We don't have to be isolated. Even if the area is rural, we don't have to be isolated. So taking advantage of that common technology to make sure that we have open lines of communication during a disaster. But of course, those open lines of communication need to start well before the disaster. We have shared concerns with surrounding counties, with the state, with federal agencies, and relationships need to be built up around those shared concerns.
Okay, thank you.
During a crisis, how would you prioritize resources and personnel?
That's a really broad question. And I think that it depends on the crisis. Understanding, what areas, say it's an area where there are several roads that need to be kept open or opened, and we have a limited number of resources to do that. I think you have to look at, in that situation, which are the most critical roads to have open, which do we need to manage the immediate response, and which do we need for evacuation if evacuation may be needed. So you need to look at that On an instance specific level, you need to look at the needs for the three priorities, of course, protecting life, protecting property, and protecting the environment, using that as your framework. And then to look at the available resources and as part of the group in the EOC to maybe to look at those and decide, make that decision about what needs to go where and when. What's the most immediate priority? Again, life, property, the environment. Is there an evacuation? Is there a vulnerable population that's affected by this particular event? And make sure that we are, prioritizing the most vulnerable and prioritizing that life safety issue. That may seem like a cop out, and I apologize if it does, but it is just such an incident specific thing. But we have an existing prioritization system, and that's really what needs to be done. But things are going to be different in every incident. There may be a need to get to a specific area, and that changes the priorities in that moment. So being flexible, but understanding the big picture. And that's the most important thing, is understanding the big picture, talking to responding organizations on the ground, and understanding what their needs are. The last thing you want is for a fire department or a police department to, need something to accomplish an immediate life safety goal and not to have it because that resource has gone somewhere else. So having that big picture view, and then using that natural framework for prioritizing our efforts.
How would you approach developing an all hazards emergency management plan?
Cooperatively. That would be a collaborative effort between the other people who have interests in those hazards, whether that's the sheriff's department or the fire department or the DNR or the DEQ, or maybe they're all one again, I've forgotten. But what state organizations, what local organizations, does it affect another county? So on a hazard by hazard basis, you need to know who all the stakeholders are. But the plan itself needs to be made collaboratively with the people who will be implementing it. A plan that I can write a plan, but if I write it and sit it on a shelf, the people who are going to need to implement that plan aren't going to be ready to do that. And if I write it, and even if I want to train people on it, it's not going to be as effective if they didn't have input in it. And I'm not arrogant enough to assume that I can write a plan for other organizations. So it's a collaborative effort. I think that there are planning meetings that you would have to, bring everybody to the table and brainstorm around, what needs to be done. And also, again, to look at those co-benefits. If we're going to address a hazard, and I'm back to mitigation. I'm sorry, we're really focused on response here. Sorry. I get excited about mitigation. But, to make sure that we're capturing what people do already, what these response agencies are doing already. Again, we're not creating a new system for the sheriff's department. We're not creating a new response system for a fire department. So we need to understand what they would do. And then the value of emergency management is in having that big picture view again. So, the fire departments and the sheriff's department and whoever else is at the table, and we can look at where there could be potentially overlapping services or overlapping needs, or where when you look at it in that big picture view, having everybody at the table, you can identify where resource gaps are too. So that collaborative process for developing those plans is foundational.
What are your key priorities as an emergency manager?
Life safety, of course, is the first one. So how do you do that? What does it look like when you say life safety is our number one priority? What does that mean? Well, it means the understanding, again, well before the disaster, what needs are going to be, what people's needs are going to be, what might happen. So that's the number one thing, is to protect those three things: life safety, property, and have those in the environment, and have those three things in place. I mean, the environment, I keep sort of skimming over that one, but that's incredibly important for a place like your county, where people are coming for recreation, where people value that the land around them, and the wildlife. So there can even be issues with, disease with wildlife and things like that that can impact it, which isn't necessarily an emergency management problem, but it's still something that is a problem for partner agencies and we need to be aware of, so that, maybe there are solutions that that also reduce risk that that can help those agencies. And again, I'm off topic and I realize it. I'm bringing myself back to topic. Can you repeat your question? I'm sorry. I got a little too far off topic that time.
What are your key priorities as an emergency manager?
Right. And again, I'm going to start back again and just say life safety, protection of property, and the environment. So to achieve those things, you need relationships, because again, I'm not the one driving maybe I'm on the bus when the disaster happens, but other people are operating that machine. So my goal is to make sure that the machine is ready for them, so that they can do those things, and so that they can come in and effectively manage the disaster, because managing the disaster is the responsibility of, and I'm not saying it's not the emergency manager's responsibility, but to actually the sheriff's department, the sheriff or their representative is going to be telling the sheriff's resources what to do. There will be a fire person in the EOC that's directing those fire resources. So from that sense, the emergency manager is a facilitator, not the person actually operating that machine. So, so you have to have those relationships, you have to have those policies and procedures in place, and those have to be the 364-day-a-year things are what makes that one day when the disaster happens work. So that's the priority, really, is making sure that all of those things are in place so that those priorities can be protected.
Have you written any grants, and can you detail a grant writing success to enrich emergency management services?
Yeah, I wrote about $3 million in grants for when I was at the city. And then I've also written since then, written guidance for communities on how to write and manage grants. So I'm very familiar with the process. I was also on FEMA's grant review team, national grant review team for 3 years. So we wrote the planning department. I had a conversation with the planning department in the city. We had a large floodplain, and they came to me and they wanted to know what we could do. They couldn't invest federal money in these floodplain homes. It was a vulnerable area, and they wanted to help these people. So we talked it through, and what we decided to do was create a floodplain acquisition program. And it was a very concentrated program. We wanted contiguous areas so that we weren't picking houses here and there. And we wanted them to be close to parks, because that would make it easier for the city to maintain the properties. So that was the plan. And we wrote about, that was most of, well, I would say, well, more than half of that $3 million in grants was for that floodplain acquisition program. And it turned out to be a really great program, because we partnered with the neighborhood, and they were interested in gardening, urban gardening. So as we bought up these properties, we were able to turn them into the county's garden program. And they started to be used for community gardens and for these other urban gardening efforts. So that was a really successful program. And again, it was more than $2 million in grants, I think, for that particular program. Started out under the pre-disaster mitigation program. We wrote for that. We also wrote under some HMGP. We got some funding under that. The HMGP is the post-disaster grant. And if you have an open door with the state, and they know you have projects that you are ready to move on, it's a lot easier to get that money through the HMGP. So that's just an example of a way to make that grant money, to get access to that grant money, is to have that relationship and to have a shovel-ready project, because the state just wants to get rid of that money as quickly as possible. So we were able to take advantage of that and get HMGP funding for that as well. We also wrote for the state's DNR trust fund, I might be getting the name of that wrong. So we acquired a couple of properties using that. So we used a variety of different grants, state, mostly federal, but there was also some state grant money involved in that. So I think you have to be, creative in funding projects sometimes. But we did have a very successful grant project for that floodplain acquisition program.
I got one more.
Yeah.
How do you stay up to date with the latest developments in emergency management?
I think it's being involved with those professional organizations. I'm a member of the International Association of Emergency Managers and the Association of State Floodplain Managers and the Michigan Floodplain, Stormwater Floodplain Association, and MEMA, the Michigan Emergency Management Association. So I'm more active in the IEM and ASFPM than the state organizations presently, but getting more active in those state organizations would be, in my interest if I were to get this job. So I would definitely do that. But attending conferences when you can, but even if you're not attending the conferences, there are newsletters and meetings and other things that you can attend virtually that aren't high cost that you can use to stay plugged in to what's happening. Because all those organizations are giving you information about what's happening in the emergency management landscape.
Which metrics do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of an emergency response plan?
I think that avoided losses is a really good metric to do that. I think it's really the only metric that matters, but that's not the only one that you would want to use. But in the end, my point there is that in the end, the only thing that matters is how much damage did you avoid? How effective were you in minimizing the effects of this disaster? Because in the end, it's everything that you do is about protecting people. But there are other metrics as well. Understanding costs is a good way to do that. Were we efficient in the way that we used resources, and what can we learn from it if we weren't? And a lot of those things, you can game plan ahead of time through exercises and identify those problems ahead of time. I think a robust exercise plan is really important. But I think there are, how many people followed your evacuation instructions? That's another metric that you can use. How many people were sheltered and how many people, weren't. So there are, I think you can look at a disaster response and recovery pretty numerically and learn from all of those things. So yeah, I think there are a number of metrics, and those are the how many people got your message, how many people, and some of these things you may need to collect survey information about afterward, and that's easy enough to do. But so yeah, I think collecting that data following a disaster is really important, and it's really going to depend on the disaster. But there are also leveraging relationships. Other organizations are collecting data as well. An office on aging might know, how many meals were served during this disaster. The Red Cross, if the Red Cross is active in the county, might know that. So gathering all that data is really important to understand the response and then to learn from it. And I think that there's a tendency after a disaster to gather things, but not to learn from them. And I think that's an important thing to avoid. You've gone through this, you've learned lessons. If you don't implement the solutions for those that you've developed for those lessons learned, the lesson really wasn't learned in the first place. So having that data, understanding that data is important, but acting on that data is ultimately the most important step in that process.
Okay. How do you approach post-incident analysis and reporting?
Again, you need to talk to the people who, there are a lot of different sources for that data. Again, it's from the organizations. All organizations have to keep track of hours. They have to keep track of expenses. So that data is there. The utility companies are collecting data. So making sure that you have a full picture of what happened. And then as far as reporting, there's a state report that is going to have to be done, but there's also an internal county report, I'm sure. And those things are important. And then, again, implementing the lessons that you learn, or if they're not actually lessons learned. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure. I think I might have just repeated what I said for the last question.
Yeah. How do you measure community resilience post-disaster?
I think you need to have a benchmark to start with. But I did my dissertation. I just finished my PhD, and I did my dissertation on the California recovery from the California wildfires in 2017 and 2018 to measure resilience in that group. And I think that was that process was something that could be replicated. It was surveys and interviews, but to understand what makes people resilient. But if you really need a benchmark ahead of time to do that, to understand how the disaster impacted somebody. But even if you don't have that, you can, through talking to people, whether that's a survey or in-person interviews or anecdotal evidence from organizations, by gathering all that data to see what's changed in the community, because every disaster, of course, has the potential to reduce resilience. And again, you have vulnerable people, and you don't want them to be more vulnerable because of the disaster. So understanding how that disaster's affected them, and working with organizations that are serving them and trying to restore that resilience, having those relationships is a really important thing resource to have.
Okay. How do you measure the effectiveness of your emergency management efforts, and how do you incorporate lessons learned from past incidents into future emergency management plans?
With willpower, because it's not easy to do. Once the disaster's over, there's a really strong inclination to move on to the next thing. But again, if you don't act on that, if you don't bring people back to the table to say, okay, this is what we learned, what are we going to do about it? And really pushing to do that, because normalcy is just such a strong thing. Once you're back to normal, there's a tendency to just let everything else go. So it is really important, and it's the role of the emergency manager to get people back to the table, to talk about what happened, to talk about the lessons that we learned, and make sure that after the next disaster, our lessons learned isn't going to look exactly the same. So again, bringing people back to the table, because the emergency manager isn't the person that needs to change. The emergency management operation may not be the thing that needs to change. Maybe it's something that the sheriff's department and local fire departments need to do better together. Maybe it's a relationship that broke down somewhere else. So again, that's part of that machine, and it's the emergency manager's job to diagnose the problem with the machine. But it's hardly ever emergency management is a job with a lot of responsibility and very little authority. And that's just the way it is and the way it's always been. The emergency manager is responsible for making sure that this response happens and happens effectively. But in the end, it's in the hands of the people on the ground, the utility companies, the sheriff's department, the fire departments, the human service organizations. All of those people who are doing the actual work of emergency management are the ones who have the authority to do that. So emergency management is an exercise in bringing people on board, in building relationships, and making sure that those people that have the authority understand the importance of pre-planning and acting ahead of time to solve these problems. So yeah, it's all responsibility and limited authority, but you have relationships with the people who do have the authority, but you need to bring them to the table and let them help them, facilitate them finding solutions for problems.
Okay. And lastly, in what ways do you incorporate community feedback into emergency preparedness plans?
I think they need to be, the community needs to be involved in emergency preparedness efforts. It's not a program that you can, develop and drop on somebody. You have to meet people where they are. And understand that. And, one of the things that when we developed the Do One Thing program, we wanted it to be something that anybody could do. And I think that's what emergency preparedness needs. FEMA could take the money that it spends on preparedness and just buy a 72-hour kit for every American and deliver it to them. But that's not the same as making people prepared for emergencies. Emergency preparedness is as much mental and emotional and, psychological effort as it is a physical effort, maybe more so. So if people aren't involved in it, and this goes right back to the question about, partnerships with organizations that manage disaster or have emergency response responsibilities. Everybody has to be on board. Everybody has to understand that this is something that you need. And an emergency or a disaster is such an unusual event. It's something that, people may never experience in their lifetime. So it's hard, and because we have this normalcy bias, it's difficult for us to picture what that will be like. You think, oh, well, there's going to be a flood. Well, you don't understand. I mean, it's like every other day, except there's more water, right? But that's not the way it really is. There's really an emotional element to disaster that we as normal people have trouble picturing and understanding how much disasters change things. So, so there's a lot of work that goes into promoting emergency preparedness and promoting risk reduction ahead of a disaster. People have to understand the importance of it before they'll, engage with it. And getting people to engage with those things ahead of time is important. So, having people involved in the process of developing the plans, but also hearing from people after an event or after a notification or after an evacuation, even if nothing happens, hearing from people and engaging with people all over again to make sure that that process is as good as it can be. And as good as it can be is based on, their evaluation of it. If this is a community preparedness program, they are the ones that can tell you whether or not it works, whether I like it or not. They're the ones that decide whether it's a effective plan.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Is there any questions you have for us?
Just one, and that is, aside from disaster, what would you say is the biggest challenge that Montmorency County faces?
Developing the emergency management plan as a whole to be functioning the way it should be, and to get those meetings up with the local partners, the LEP and those things.
And I didn't answer your question about the LEPC. I moved on to something else, but I have, we had our own LEPC for a while, and then we merged into the county's LEPC. So those are important relationships to manage. And that's a really important resource to have in a rural area.
Thank you.
I'll be in touch, Rhonda, after we review everything today and let you know from there on. Okay?
All right, great. Thank you. It was nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Daniel's not gonna be on there. We have Aaron next, so we can move on to Aaron. But he has an appointment at 4 o'clock, so if we could kind of like combine maybe some questions and streamline it a little bit, so we could try to fit them in as much as we can, unless otherwise we'll have to reschedule.
No, that's fine. Do you want to ask if they're willing to relocate with your Montmorency question, Bob?
It's kind of given. I was more concerned about the one that was living up by Presque Isle.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because of Lansing.
Hi, Aaron.
Obviously,
Sorry about the
happened.
delay. We're gonna try to streamline this for you so we can get you out in time.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
What are your expectations? Helping the Montmorency BOC program, or the EM program.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You asked my expectations?
For developing the Montmorency EM program, emergency management program.
My expectations, I did some review of the hazard mitigation plan and the recent disaster you guys went through, the ice storm. I hope you're all recovering well from that. Is to develop and foster a resilient community. I think that there is opportunity within the community to build a CERT program to foster and use the resources and the people within the community to make a more resilient community. I noticed that you guys called in an IMT as part of your response to the ice storm. And while that is definitely an option, especially in a large scale incident in a rural community with limited resources, I think there's potential within communities to build up that response within the community itself. For instance, the position of finance and admin section chief as part of the IMT can be filled with a town controller or a town tax assessor, someone familiar with kind of the finance side of things. So that's one of the things that I would like to work towards.
What made you choose to apply to Montmorency County?
A few factors have gone into my application. I was raised in Michigan in St. Clair County, just south of Port Huron. So returning home to Michigan, the rural, outdoorsy nature of Montmorency County, and definitely the seasons in Michigan, definitely weighed into that decision. That's the kind of lifestyle me and my family would like to lead. Currently in South Georgia, where I work for the Georgia Department of Public Health under a federal grant, and the status of that grant is kind of in question with the changes at the federal level. So I'm looking for a county level or a state level position that's a little more sure in its footing, I would say. So that definitely weighed into my application of Montmorency County. I currently work in South Georgia, their Southern Health District, and all 10 counties that I collaborate with and work with are rural counties. I definitely understand the rural lifestyle in a rural county, and that also played into looking into Montmorency County.
What are your strengths and weaknesses as an emergency manager?
One of my strengths as an emergency manager is the breadth of emergency management experience that I have. Not only do I have a master's degree in emergency management and disaster response and high-level certifications, including FEMA's Advanced Professional Development Series, the Georgia Advanced Certified Emergency Manager Series, but practical boots on the ground experience as well. Prior to my role here with public health, I spent 8 years in EMS and private security down in Florida. During that time, I did cooperated with both federal, state, and local agencies in a variety of capacities, including medical response, active shooter response, and other security related responses. My weaknesses, I've spent 3 years here in South Georgia with the Georgia Department of Public Health. And at that time, I've grown in my understanding of the government, how things are done at the government and county level. But I would say that's still something I'm working towards. I spent far more time in the private sector where kind of the response to things was more immediate and it was sometimes easier to get things done. So working through kind of the government red tape is something I'm still learning.
Right. Can you detail your experience in leading evacuation operations?
For evacuation operations, I have done both tabletop and functional exercises, as well as during Hurricanes Debbie, Helene, and Idalia. down here in South Georgia. As the ESF 8 health and medical representative, we did a lot of work with the evacuation shelters.
What is your experience with other government agencies, emergency services, nonprofit organizations, and community relations?
There's been, over my experience, a wide range of collaboration with government agencies, everything from local police and fire rescue to federal law enforcement agencies. Nonprofits like the American Red Cross. Currently in my position, we work very closely for sheltering operations with the American Red Cross and other nonprofit organizations and volunteer organizations.
Kind of tying back with the first question, if you were hired in this position, what would be some of the immediate steps you would take, and kind of over the first 3 to 6 months, the specific things that you would do?
During the first 30 days, it'd be a lot of review and understanding of the county, reviewing EOPs, the mitigation plan, and other plans and annexes to really understand what the county has as far as an EM program and where it can be enhanced upon and built upon. Following that, I think there are already some opportunities. You guys went through that ice storm, and donation management seemed to be something that came up in some of the committee review from the citizens. And so looking at current gaps like that and building out those kind of first and foremost. And then again, going back to building a resilient community, I think there's opportunity for things like CERT. I think there's opportunity things like ARES and ham radio. I'm currently a general class amateur radio operator, worked very close with our Georgia ARES partners during Hurricane Helene, and I was able to provide emergency communications for several counties that didn't have another way to do things like resource requests up to the state level. So again, I think reviewing what there is and then building upon the capacity of the community.
I'm going to kind of combine a couple questions here. So what role does technology play in modern emergency management? And if you could comment specifically on challenges with the mass notification system.
Yep. There's definitely the role in technology in emergency management. I'm familiar with several different things, Web EOC. Currently in the Department of Public Health, we use a mass notification system called ReadyOp that allows for mass text, call, and email to specified users. But there's also challenges with that. During Hurricane Helene, we didn't have reliable cell coverage, we didn't have reliable internet coverage, and so we had to leverage other technologies. We leveraged Starlink, we leveraged amateur radio to fill those gaps. I know I talk about a lot about hurricanes here in South Georgia. That's kind of our big hazard. I noticed you guys have wildfires listed as a main hazard, as well as winter storms. And again, those same challenges come up. Things like sheltering, things like communication. Regardless of what caused the event, those challenges exist. And so I have a lot of experience dealing with those kind of challenges and the technology that can go into solving them. Mass communication, especially public communication, is hugely important in disaster, both before, during, and after the disaster. I think as much communication as you can get out before the disaster strikes, there's not as much needed during the disaster, right? You've kind of cut that off before it became an issue. But there are opportunities for mass notifications, again, through things like ReadyOp. Code Red is another avenue. And then simple things like weather radios is a huge thing. Equipping citizens and common places with weather radios allows for that messaging to go out.
Okay. How do you conduct risk assessments in rural areas, and how would you maintain up-to-date knowledge of emerging threats and risks?
Risk assessments, I am currently in charge of risk assessment in my role with South Health District that includes 10 rural counties. I developed an Excel program that looks at the history of disasters within the county, the projected impact of those disasters, and it develops a risk score. I then wanted to look at, okay, so we know the risk of the disaster, but how are we prepared for it? And looking at that preparedness, have we done training? Are our partners organized in such a way to respond to those disasters? Have we exercised with our partners for that disaster? Those things help mitigate the impact of that disaster. So just because a disaster is maybe more common and maybe have a higher risk, if we've done those preparedness efforts, we can mitigate the risk to the population.
Okay. You kind of answered some of my questions too, because during our ice storm outage, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have, and of course, our communication was impaired, very similar to your hurricane. And you kind of already answered my question. So how did you get Starlink, the ham radio operators? How did you develop that process?
Through partnerships, I've been active with our Aries group since 2023. And so through those partnerships, I was able to ready those resources for deployment. And then it was as simple as, hey, the need came in, let's deploy that resource. So through those partnerships and through pre-staging of those assets, it was a fairly simple process to get them the communications they needed. We currently have Starlink units at all of our health departments, as well as mobile units that are ready to deploy. So again, having that pre-staged and pre-prepared before the disaster strikes limited the impact of the communication outage.
Okay. And what is your strategy for training staff and volunteers, and then coordinating also on the other level with the local, state, and different agencies during a disaster?
The training of volunteers and staff, at least in my view, is almost more important than what emergency management does at the response level. The response levels for the first responders, emergency management is there to build up the capacity for that response. So I do training both within the community and within public health itself in several different aspects: stop the bleed, CPR, active shooter response, and just overall preparedness. We do a quarterly preparedness newsletter that goes out to our community that highlights some of these opportunities. So identifying the need, identifying who in the community can fill that need, and developing that training is definitely important. On the response side of things, coordinating with partner agencies is again about building those relationships on blue sky days. Building the relationship with the ham radio operators allowed quick activation for that community, for that communication outage. It took a call to someone I've had a prior well-established relationship with, and it made that really easy. So building that relationship is super important in emergency management.
Okay, you got a few.
No, you're good. Michelle? I didn't have any questions you were gonna ask.
You want me to read my question?
Well,
No.
You only got a few minutes. Let me double check. Have you written any grants, and can you detail a grant writing process to enrich the emergency management services?
I have not personally written grants. I've been involved in the grant writing process a little bit. We are currently writing and awaiting approval for a federal grant for generators. I was involved in that process. I know how it works, but I have not written the grant myself.
Okay. I have one more. How do you measure the effectiveness of your emergency management efforts, and how do you incorporate lessons learned from past incidents in the future emergency management plans?
Lessons learned is huge. I currently am the primary author of all of our after action reports, which includes an improvement plan. And understanding what you've done during previous deployments, previous disasters, and previous exercises is what you do to build for the future capacity. During Hurricane Helene, we noticed several gaps in our preparedness. One of them was our ability to power the Starlinks we have at the health departments. They were connected in such a way that didn't work with our backup generators. And so that was something identified in Hurricane Idalia and was rectified for Hurricane Helene, allowing us to be better prepared for that disaster.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, I have a few. Kind of this ice storm just hit, and you guys are recovering from that. What is your goal for the emergency management department, kind of based on going through that disaster without a director?
Just to have all of those pieces put together, similar to what you just said, have those community relationships, those the LPT and the LEPC groups together and working together, having the trained staff to man our own EOC. That was, we called in the IMT, and because we had staff that were here, but they could be here one day and not the next. So to, build those collaborative networks.
Definitely, and that's definitely something I'm familiar with. Currently, our nursing staff is responsible for a medical piece within post-event and evacuation shelters, and so taking someone who's like 9 to 5 job is not emergency medicine. They do like a lot of vaccine related things, and training them up to do something that's ancillary to what they do, but kind of markedly different from the day to day is something I'm very familiar with. My next question, obviously I'm in South Georgia. It would take, I'm guessing, approximately 6 to 8 weeks to really kind of finish up what I have to do here and get up to northern Michigan and obviously find housing accommodations. What's your timeline look like once you've made your decision?
I would say we would like somebody within the next month, I would say. I see.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, I mean, that's definitely something I could work towards, but obviously moving north and south across the country presents some logistical difficulties.
But you'd be willing to relocate to Montmorency County itself?
Yes, yes. Would the position require residency within the county?
No, it doesn't. We're just interested.
Okay.
Reasonably close to it. You
Yes.
can't be too far away.
Right. Obviously, within 30 minutes of the county line, or probably something similar to that. Okay. I mean, ideally, I would love to live in the county. I want to kind of put down roots. This move is a long-term move for me. This is a career move. This is what I see myself doing. I went and got my master's degree in emergency management to make a move like this. I've worked, with my own professional development to make a move like this. So it's a long-term career move. But, I just wanted to kind of set the expectation of whether it'd be within the county or not.
Yeah. Understood.
Let's see. I guess my other question, I'm moving up with a family. My wife works in the medical billing field. I know you guys have a clinic. Are there other medical opportunities kind of in or around the county?
Yes, there's a hospital in Alpena County to our east and Gaylord in our west.
Okay. I mean, obviously, a move with family, as I'm sure you all know, it has to make sense for the whole family. And it sounds like as long as there's opportunity there, it's definitely a move we're looking to make.
Okay.
I appreciate your time. I appreciate the opportunity to do this via Zoom, and to not have to trek all the way up to Michigan, at least not yet. And I appreciate the time crunch. I apologize for kind of putting you guys in a little bit of a crunch. So thank you for that flexibility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We were planning on being as long, so. Sorry, you had to wait for a little while.
Questions?
It's okay. I totally understand you guys called this special meeting for this purpose, and I understand that getting people together for a meeting is probably one of the most difficult things.
Yes.
Again, I appreciate your time and considerations. So thank you. If anyone has any final questions, I'm open.
So they will evaluate everything we talked about today, on the other candidates, and then I'll be in touch with you, Aaron, to let you know what they've decided after today's meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So do we think that Dan should have a brief break probably?
Yeah, I need one.
Okay.
Did you join yet or no?
I don't know. Do we know if he?
We tried calling and no response, so, because right when he got on, I told Dawn to call him and let him know that we had more in front of him, and so it would be a while before we'd get to his interview, but he'd be in the waiting room, and then he disconnected probably after the second one, and I asked them to call him and see if he was getting back on, and they've left voicemails and no response.
We try texting and calling him again, maybe.
When you get back from break.
Yeah, I can go ask them if they can check again.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, we need to not
Yeah.
let him.
Think that
take his chance back.
old and
When I dressed cool.
I swear to a certain time that Eric
It
has
never
on.
mattered, it's always. I'm always freezing right now.
Laura, you gotta be cold too.
I'm always cold in here. I usually have a jacket on, but this is sleeves, but it's like see-through sleeves, so.
Well, sleeves don't help much then, do they?
No, because they're see-through, so they don't.
Had to cancel because I had a doctor's physical this morning. And it was an hour apart from Alpena to Hanover. You know, I can't make it, so I readjusted the dentist. Then I was in a board meeting in church, and when I put the line through it, I just obliterated this meeting. And as soon as Dawn called, I'm going,
Too many things.
Sounds like Daniel Stephen just decided to drop out of it.
Kind of, doesn't it?
So we're gonna have to interview the fifth one or the four, good enough.
I guess we can't just, I'm thinking, or we've got some really good candidates, don't we? I'm pretty impressed with their responses. I don't have a problem with
I
four.
guess if we wanna stick with the five or go with the four, I guess that's what everybody wants to do.
I'm okay with four,
Yeah, I mean,
because you would have thought he would have texted us back or something and said,
yeah, if
just.
it came up, you'd at least
Yeah.
inform us some way that
Yeah,
something just.
exactly. Speaking of grants, I see that information on those generators, do I have to sign something or are we not?
I have not finished reviewing what she sent over today, so I will.
Okay, all right. I didn't know if I had to.
Yeah, I was gonna run through it today, but I was getting stuff prepped, so I didn't get a chance to
Okay,
review what it sent.
Oh, you didn't think- I thought that was locked. You can
I
get
don't know
through.
what it is, but you want me to leave it with it or close it?
you can shut it. I just had it open because.
So, yeah, no luck with Dan, so I mean, he calls after this, and I don't know what else to do. I don't get a prior commitment, but we tried calling in, maybe emailed it in, sent a text, and nothing, so.
Was he on to begin with?
Yeah, and then he dropped off like after the second one. So he might have had something else going on, or maybe didn't want to wait around, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but you should have contacted you somehow to let you know what was going on.
Mhm. So
Maybe he had an emergency.
we'll just go with what we have, I guess.
Now that's what Bob and I were just.
Yeah, we can't really wait. I mean, we. Can,
We
but I
waited
just
and
mean,
waited and waited.
Do we have to do all our stuff to, like, right now?
So do you want to, I guess this is the question, do you want to just take the time to review all your things and then send me your scores, and then I can compile them with everybody, and then you guys give me the authority to offer them the position based off of who gets the highest scoring between all of you? Because if otherwise we're waiting till the 26th to hire.
we need to make a decision right away. I don't know if we want to just kind of talk it out here between us.
Well, we have the scoring.
Other than the last one, we kind of
Well, I kind of
been
like
around.
to do like a comparison sort of thing, so. But I mean,
Well, do you wanna-
I have my top order, so we can talk through it. I'm fine talking through it.
Because I was
I
gonna
just
say, do you
can't-
want to take
yeah.
15 minutes? You want to take 15 minutes?
Well, let's just talk through it. Did Lloyd,
Okay.
did Lloyd have to leave?
No, he's just.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's just.
There's a
Yeah, we
line.
can-
He's
we
just in
can-
line.
I kind of have it in this. I didn't put it on here yet, so I'm good. We can talk through
Okay.
it. Like, I. do it-
That's my first question would be, is there anybody we're willing to rule out?
So, wait, question, should we
Go into closed to discuss it and then come out for a decision?
Well, can you go into closed if it
I think
wasn't?
you
on the agenda?
can, I think the interviews themselves, if the candidate asks, you can,
Yeah.
but otherwise I think it has to still be.
I mean, I'm just wondering if you wanted all of it, because you have newspaper on, so I didn't know if you. What was gonna get reported.
We can go into a closed session if you'd like. We could do that, I suppose.
If it follows the guidelines is the question. Cheryl's
No,
checking.
we can go into a closed session.
Okay.
We just have to say what it's for.
You'd have to make a motion to do it, but Cheryl's making sure it fits the guidelines first.
Consider a dismissal, suspension, or discipline. For strategy and negotiation sessions connected with negotiating of a collective bargaining agreement. To consider the purchase or lease of property,
Consult with, okay, last one, to review and consider the contents of an application for employment or appointment to a public office if the candidate requests that the application remain confidential. However, except as otherwise provided in the subsection, all interviews by a public body for employment or appointment to a public office must be held in an open meeting.
That's, yeah, if you done publicly. So, do you guys all have a top two that you want to talk about? Because that might make it easier.
14, definitely. I have 14.
14 and 4. I like that too.
Yeah, 14, let me look at the others.
What are your top two, Bob?
I would say I
I
have
was
4 and
thinking
13 the
4 and
same.
13 myself.
4 and 13? Mary, 4 and 13? Did you say? I didn't hear you.
Well, I have 2 that I rated the same.
14 is her top, and then 4 and 13, she has the same as
Gotcha.
I have the same thing. 14, number 1, 4 and 13 are about the same.
Okay, and Lloyd, what were your two top?
My top one is 14.
All right, so
I think that was on
Yes.
I didn't have number 14 as my number 1 though. I mean, I more had like 14 and 4 similar, and the reason for that is because number 4, I highlighted some things and I said 14 has phenomenal experience. Number 4 has relevant experience that I think can be applied to the position, but had really good answers, in my opinion, that relate to our county. And a few other things I liked. You can highlight them if you'd like, just for the conversation.
We're not gonna do number 18.
That wasn't one of our top.
Huh?
He didn't show up,
Oh, well,
or he showed up and he left.
Yeah, he was
wonder
on.
why we were talking about all these.
Yeah.
for my
Well, we didn't finish it.
commentary I had for number 14 was, I'm not so sure she's aware of how infantile our program is. That was my only biggest concern. Like, I think she's thinking of coming in, it's gonna be a whole network of things she can work with when we don't have that. That was my only big comment I had on that one.
Yeah, I agree. I was a little concerned about being too city focused versus understanding the.
She's real forward, bro. mean,
Number 14.
I know she knows her job, but that's what I liked about her, but yeah, she's still my number 1, but out of all of them, she really stands out.
Yeah,
She does.
My personal opinion
she
is,
definitely stands
I
out.
didn't care
And
for
what I
that
like
much.
is being from.
14 was Rhonda,
Just
She's
wait,
got all
number
content.
4 was
Yeah.
John Chapman, and number 13 is Sarah.
Because her answers, as long as rambling, I look for somebody that has clear and concise directions and answers, where she just kind of rambled on too much, in my opinion.
I thought the same thing.
I wrote that down too.
Or I think that number 4 really gave you direct response for this area, like he researched this area and knew more
did.
about it.
The only issue I had was he's not certified.
Well,
But
neither
he's
is
in the
Sarah.
process. He's in, I think he said within a year, I think.
Right. He thought he could do it.
Yeah, he
within
said less than a year, and Sarah isn't certified yet either. She's got a few classes to finish.
Sounds like, well,
Yeah.
sounds like a year too, if she has to take 2 more
Mhm. Yeah.
classes and wait for a next cycle.
And Rhonda said that she was certified, but she said it's been 4 years since she's been in local emergency
Yeah, so
management.
she's still, yeah.
So I just want to highlight like number 4, a couple things that stood out that I starred. So in that's the number 1 question, I think. He talked about meeting with EMS, police, fire, that type of stuff, but he talked about working with the board to develop a vision, which I thought was kind of an important thing. Identifying strengths and weaknesses and prioritizing, because things may differ across the county, which I agree with that as well. He commented about having unique risks. Again, it's kind of like understanding, I think, our area versus the city type of situation. He mentioned talking to farmers and business owners, along with like public health and everything else. How can we support each other? He talked about weekenders, which I thought, for me at least, like in Lewiston is a really big deal. Like, how do you get in touch with those
Mhm.
people? They're not full-time residents. I really liked how he also talked about a notification system for non-emergencies as well. And they all kind of touched on, you don't want to over communicate because people will tend to not listen to the messages. He talked about question 11, knowing where the hazards are, making sure the fire department and others have the training. We know what the mutual aid resources are. So that was something that I thought was unique, was actually identifying where the hazards even exist. He talked about in question 13, a lot about building relationships. I like how he got really specific about the power outage issue, but also the resource issue. I felt like some of the candidates didn't really get into much on the resource side of it, but building the network of the community-based service organizations. Needs mentioned American Legion, the church. There's nonprofits that are trying to do things. So that I think is a thing that would actually benefit our county greatly. He was the only one that actually mentioned partnerships with National Guard and politicians, which I thought is a critical thing. He did talk about, what's question 16? I highlighted depends on what's happening and where, and that things may be different. But I think Rhonda also is somewhat similar. Like it depends on the crisis. So I really liked that. It depends on the situation type of mindset, because it's true that everything is the same. And I do like that he and Rhonda, this is another reason why I ranked them both in the top 2, is because they were both very data driven when we talked about what kind of metrics can we look at. And they both gave very specific examples of metrics, and Sarah didn't really do that. She's like, well, it's kind of difficult to measure, but they give really good examples of things you would measure. And one of the key things being loss of life or loss of property. But I liked some of the things he mentioned, like did we get training and what was it? And was that useful training? Which is a really good thing, because if we just keep doing training on things, but is that the type of training we needed? Like just those kinds of things.
You need
really
the feedback from the trainings.
Well, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
he seems really practical in that regard, and I liked, just kind of going off of what you said, I like the fact that he said he's not gonna write a grant for a grant itself. It
I
needs
like
to
that
be a
too.
need, Not
Yeah.
just going for something and then trying to build something around the grant.
Yeah.
That stuck out to me too, as a note I put, that he says he's not just gonna be writing grants to write grants. Another thing that I noticed on Sarah and John, and not Rhonda, is that she never mentioned the after action meetings. Like never once did she mention. I was waiting for that and nothing ever came out about that. And I thought that was strange, because I thought, no, that was a big part of a disaster, was the after action. You
who,
learn
Rhonda?
so much.
Yeah.
Rhonda never mentioned that. John and Sarah both mentioned it.
I noticed that.
But that was something. And another thing that this is more logistical. Sarah is not gonna be moving to the county. She'd be commuting, so she's at least 40 minutes away. And Rhonda, she said she'd be here, but she also mentioned that her family was in Sheboygan. So would she want to stay here, or would she end up eventually going to Sheboygan?
Yeah.
Too far away,
Yeah.
especially if you have an event like we had where the roads are
Mhm.
impassable in some areas. I like Jonathan because he was the most clear and concise about what he was talking about. He didn't ramble on and get off subject. He kind of answered in the most direct way to the questions that were being asked of him.
Mhm.
I liked the connection to being an educator he has with the schools, because we have 3 schools. And we found that during, like we had Atlanta probably was the easy, and I don't know if it was just because Chris was here and was our liaison, but we got a lot of support. We had a hard time connecting with Hillman. We had a hard time connecting, in Lewiston directly. And that turned out to be a connection that we really found out we needed, especially for that communication piece, when we didn't have any other sources, the schools knew who to contact. I like that piece. I think that'll be good.
He was also the first one to mention mutual aid.
Yes.
And you didn't see that from the other ones.
I
And
mentioned it in the first
first
question.
question, he mentioned it, and I thought that was great. Another thing that even though he doesn't have emergency management experience per se in the actual emergency management part, he had a lot of where he went to Alabama and Florida in disaster situations, so at least he had experience in those kinds of things.
Well, he said, I think I wrote that he was in, yes, hurricane.
He
And
said
he had worked-
hurricane
and he worked
tornadoes in Alabama.
logistics. He worked logistics in the hurricane, which is wonderful.
One thing I
experience.
really liked he mentioned about the AAR too was that he's like kind of also looking at, did we get lucky? And if we got lucky on something, how do we make sure we don't rely on luck next time?
Right.
Like that's kind of a critical thing, because you think, well, this went well, but did it go well because we got lucky?
Think of all the other things that could go wrong or that we need to think about too.
Yeah.
Not just stick with it. This is what worked good, so we'll stick with it.
Yep. He
Now,
also made a really good point about like when training and working with staff, that he would know who had the areas of expertise and using them and focusing on those people to provide that instead of expecting himself to do it.
everything.
Was he the one who had mentioned that in training to make sure that the trainings are to where the people can understand it?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like above them when you're trying to teach them? Yeah, that was good.
I think Rhonda kind of touched on
Back to
that.
my point.
That is good.
Concise, a good leader, they
Yes.
tell you what they want in one paragraph, not some long.
Yeah, you don't need this big old book and, yeah, just tell me.
Now, not to discount Sarah,
Full
she's
point.
built from the ground up too, and she knows that's what we need, so she truly has that
No,
understanding coming in, but I think John asking that question and us being able to say, this is our situation. I think that's good that I always think it's good when people have a question for the.
And he asked a
interviewers.
couple, which
He
was
asked a
nice.
couple.
Actually, a few, yes, and I thought that was nice.
No,
And they were
where's he
good.
live?
Oh,
He's in Ohio right now, I think. Is that right?
Davisburg, Michigan.
Oh, he's in Davisburg. What was his last experience with Ohio?
he went to school there, it looks like.
Oh, maybe I'm looking at the wrong.
Well, he said he was doing contractual stuff, so that might be what he's
I
doing.
think.
When he's got Ohio and California listed,
Yeah.
is when he was doing a contractual
Oh,
Looks
thing.
like he's
Too
training. Looks like he's a
Okay.
trainer.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
a
think
trainer of the
they
trainers,
choose a little too
perhaps,
much.
kind of
Well, Sheriff Saxville, do you have an opinion on who
I
you
think
like
it's
best?
between her and four.
Of the interviewees,
Yes.
is there an intention to do a second interview with any of them, or is this gonna be a one? I agree with everything you guys have stated. I mean, to make it short, I agree with everything you're saying. I think
I just hate to
I think-
extend it.
Rhonda's.
Unless there's like a close.
So anyway, I agree. I like him. I don't know if we're using numbers or names, but I like Jonathan a lot. I thought he was fantastic, but Sarah does bring experience and does bring some local knowledge that, Jonathan's gonna have to pick up on, not that that's not surmountable. I think worrying about where people live is important, like make sure they're within the vicinity, but we don't know where he could buy a house in Alpena. I mean,
long
unless
as
you're
we
gonna
have-
dictate it, as long as they're close, is all that matters. But I was just curious. I didn't know if you were gonna narrow it down and then re-interview or have if that was what your thoughts were on it, but I think you had really remarkable applicants, to be truthfully honest with you. And
Yeah, I
I do
think you
too.
did a good job in choosing the top 5.
That,
He didn't.
yeah, that was our.
That was
That's the
everybody
sheriff.
together.
So, no, the people who, I'll give credit, and Jonathan, seriously, wasn't even the top 5. He was top 6. Because we couldn't get a hold of the 5th person that scored out on the top 5.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we did, because I think he was a great candidate, because when I scored, I thought that was my top 5. When I reviewed it, he was. But Dave Hornbacher, Corey Cullum, all of Tri-Township EMS, their whole crew sat down and scored. All of Vienna Fire Department scored together and gave us scorings. Oakland IMT, Mike DeCastro, those were the ones who provided scoring to get these narrowed down to the top individuals.
They did a good job.
Yeah, they did. They could-
And no references were checked yet, right?
No.
Okay, so,
What I like most about number 14, Rhonda, is that a couple of things. One, she's wrote over $1 million in grants. She not only knows where to go to get the grants, but she knows how to write the grants. And 2, she has work experience with the Tri-County area. She knows the resources. She has the points of contact. That's huge. That's huge when you have an emergency and you have to get out there and
But
make.
that's Lansing.
That's Lansing.
What?
She has
That's
been there.
Lansing.
And she hasn't been
That's
there in 4
Lansing,
years.
but if she comes up here,
Yeah,
she brings a
knowing
wealth of knowledge with her.
Yeah.
We're here and we had to go to Lansing. We had Oakland County. We brought it up here. If she comes up here, she brings all of that with her.
Yeah, true enough.
You know, that's nothing to be made light of.
No.
That's a huge bonus.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing between Sarah and Rhonda that they both said that I think was important, it's question 18, I forget how it's worded.
Priorities.
What are your key priorities? And they both said, you know, preserving like property or safety of people, property and environment, and
Yeah, property,
Yeah.
life,
Safety,
Yeah.
safety was like, you know, like. was number
financial,
one.
Yep.
environment.
Not that John had a bad answer, but he didn't say that, so that just caught my attention, because it's true, that's kind of what your ultimate goal is.
Now, he said he had grant writing experience.
Yeah.
Well, I think we got the top three all have grant writing experience. Probably John and Rhonda more than Sarah,
right?
but they all three had experience in it. Sarah has our local connections with Region 7 in the state, so she obviously worked with that.
Did Sarah say that she would have to drive from Prestique Isle to here?
She's 40 minutes away, she said.
Yeah.
I will say, like, knowing our area and the people we work with,
That's a plus.
Rhonda saying that she's abrupt, that might not go well. I don't think it will go well. I mean, I wouldn't see that working well with our fire guys, you.
I mean, it's hard to, I don't know, like Zoom's tough for me. I think she's very matter of fact, and her knowledge base is gonna earn her a lot of credit.
Well, like she said, she's very more or less outspoken.
Very,
That's how she-
and that's, like me personally, that's not necessarily a bad thing. One thing I think one of you have already brought it up, like there's a huge transition from Lansing to Montmorency County. And what she was even able to accomplish, even if she has great ideas, like just as we all know, the resources around here are absolutely minuscule compared to what she's used to, and that kind of concerns me. Like I literally, I don't know if she understands completely Montmorency County, like legitimately.
We're like little compared to, like, we're
Yeah.
back road compared to Lansing.
Yeah.
And is she gonna get bored? Is she gonna
Well,
not
and how
be
infantile
satisfied
Or
with
our
this?
system
frustrated,
is.
right.
I don't think she.
Yeah, there was something she commented on,
Using our
maybe it was the
systems and
first one,
procedures.
it's like basically we have or something. One of the things I think she commented about adding to what we have, but I think we don't have what she thinks we have.
I kind of took that to her. I think she thinks that we have a lot more in place than what we do.
She said something about training EOC staff. Well, yeah, that haven't even established who our EOC would be, so you can't really train them yet. I don't know if she's aware of how.
And we
much
have
needs to be
transient
done.
EOC because like the firemen after the first week had to go back to work.
Mhm.
What are we gonna do? We can't make them stay, and that's not right.
And I'm not
You know,
sure
we
she's
gotta-
aware that we have volunteer departments. These aren't
Paid.
full paid constant. These are all volunteer. I didn't get the feeling that she got that.
One thing I noticed that she seemed to be, I don't want to say overly concerned about the environment, but it seemed like it was a little higher on her list of priorities than it should have been, instead of more about what's going on with the people in the community than worrying about environmental issues.
She's been working with FEMA for the last 4 years. So instead of in the local EM, so she's gonna be more federally in tune
Much
than
different.
what's happening locally with us. Which right now we know Montmorency County is more worried about local issues than federal issues, you know, and they don't get tied
Sometimes I
into.
heard her listed as their number 3 priority, and I think there should be a few other things that come before that.
So I guess, are you guys saying probably remove? Which one would you like to remove from the top 3 then? So we can further discuss, I guess. Or do you want to go through and score these and come up with an answer from that?
is number 18 not interested anymore?
I think we put that.
He was in for the first hour of the meeting.
That's who you're talking
We
about.
talked to him, told him it was gonna be a little bit, and then he disappeared, and then we have not gotten a hold back of him since.
Cause I had him scored pretty high too.
A lot of people did.
Yeah,
He was
we
our
did too.
number one or number
I
two
was gonna
pick.
say, he was mine too.
Yeah, he would have been my number 2. It would have been 14 and 18 would have been, yeah.
I,
But I mean, no response back at all as to why he left or anything. And I mean, I get it. They were waiting for quite a while, but could have at least communicated with us why they were.
Well, that's what
dropping off.
Bob said, he could have just.
I'd give you some type of a
Yeah,
call or note, message or something.
and that's what, Aaron did. He said he had to leave at 4, so.
Well, do we think then that for our area, are we down to like 13 and 4? Are we down to Sarah and Jonathan? Is that what we're thinking?
I feel that.
I-
That they'd be a
I would
better
have that
fit?
conversation, I feel that way.
Yeah, that well. They know, Sarah knows.
Thinking more locally.
Would you guys have follow-up questions you want me to ask them that I could just call and ask them and talk to them about? Or did you want to make a decision?
More down than this now.
Well, I scored these two the same.
My top 2 are Sarah and Jonathan.
Okay, see, and I scored them the same as well.
I see I have John higher.
You have Jonathan higher?
Yeah.
But we could put in the scores and do it from there. That's fine, because that's why we did the rubric, to make it more.
How are you guys between those two? You kind of indifferent, or do you have a strong preference? Or-
I like Sarah, between Rhonda and Sarah,
No, Jonathan.
or Jonathan was like my number 1. And then between Sarah and Rhonda,
Well,
I
if we
like-
take Rhonda off the table,
you did take her off?
Yeah.
well, because we thought who would be fit our community.
Okay,
What are you thinking?
Who you taking off, Sarah?
No,
no, Rhonda.
The question would be is how many people feel Jonathan would be their number 1 pick?
well, we can,
I mean, Sarah obviously she lived through the ice storms.
so she has that
She has
experience.
that experience, but I think, like you were saying with the schools, and I think bringing in an outside perspective is not a bad thing either. And we'll work collaboratively with the other EMs within the area too, so.
And if Crestview finds out we steal their EM, are they gonna try to offer her a full-time position to stay?
And
my
honestly,
concern.
she talked about, full-time is helpful from a money perspective, but I always get concerned when people are doing something for money, because is the salary really are we low on the
I
salary?
thought she was gonna be paid less being here. When we talked to her originally, we were talking about our
Well-
doing combined with everybody, and we had those meetings. Sarah was very money driven, and she said that she could make more at Presque County than doing the job between Alpena and Montmorency. So she wasn't interested at that time. So I was kind of surprised when she applied, knowing the salary range, because I thought she was making more there.
I already thought she was making 58.
I thought she was like almost 60 grand.
I was thinking she was 2, because I know they have.
And they
a
do
better
have part-time benefits
Is
too.
the salaries published with the job description, or would they not know?
We told them when we called
Oh,
for interviews,
So
because
they
we
knew.
wanted to make sure that
Okay.
people were aware, so we wouldn't waste their time or our time.
Yeah, so I don't know.
Well, we decided on an actual salary. I thought we started out as a range.
I said 55 to 60 was our range, and so I said, if that's suitable for you, let us know, because we would want to make you interview if you weren't, when we called and set up the interviews. And everybody was agreeable to that range.
Jonathan is my top pick, although I think Sarah would not be a disservice to the county either. But if others are on the fence still, I'm fine doing the scoring. If you want to proceed, I can fill out my sheets and just send them to you.
However you want to do it.
Looking.
He was
Rhonda's
my top,
pick.
he was my top pick too.
Okay, so you said Jonathan, right?
Yeah.
And my top pick is Jonathan, second is Sarah.
What about you, Michelle? Can we be this informal? Is everybody okay with that?
Mine's Jonathan, and then mine was between Sarah and Rhonda.
Okay, so you were, okay, so we already have 3 Jonathans, and I'm telling you, I did both of them the same.
Did you Jonathan too?
Jonathan and Sarah were neck and neck.
Yeah.
I had them scored the same.
Yeah, they were pretty much the same. I think she was,
I
well,
did have the same score.
she was right close.
So who was your?
My
top
number
score?
1 was Rhonda, number 2 was Jonathan.
Okay,
So you guys want me to make the offer to him?
Jonathan,
Do we need to check references, you think?
well, we'd make the offer and check the references.
At the same time? Jonathan?
Yes.
It looks like majority for
Because and
Jonathan.
until those come back, I think we still say that,
I think Sarah would certainly be in something.
would be in the running.
True.
Yeah, so if something does not come through in the,
Do you, okay, so this is my question. Do you want to make a motion to hire Jonathan and I do that? Or do you want to make a motion that I do follow-up references for Sarah and for Jonathan? And not only that, maybe send out the unredacted names for these two to our group and ask them their opinion again? Or is that gonna be a problem because she's local? I just,
What are we talking
I don't think
timeline
so.
though? That's the thing.
yeah.
I'd be worried about the timeline and extending it out.
no, I think we can, I think we can reach out. I wouldn't say no to Sarah right at this minute. I would offer it to Jonathan and check his references if something doesn't.
Skeleton comes out of the closet.
Yeah,
No, yeah.
but tell her that we'll.
That's the problem though with references. They cannot say anything bad about a reference. Like if you call for references, they can't say
No.
anything,
They could just say what,
or they could choose
when
not
they
to.
were, yeah, they
Yeah,
could
they're
just
not
say
gonna
that
pick
they
a
were.
reference and it's gonna say anything bad about them.
He's offered first, she'll be second. Yeah,
What
it doesn't
what
go
was-
through.
What did you go through?
I just said Jonathan will be offered, and if something happens and that doesn't go through, then you'll get a hold of Sarah.
Okay. Or you just have to make a motion for me to do that if that's what you want to do.
I'll make the motion to offer Jonathan, I guess we should have done, yeah. I make the motion to offer Jonathan Chapman the position. Using the scale that we provided, I would suggest, since he still needs to have some certification, start midway through. What would that be, 56 or 58? What was our?
We said 55 to 60. So that was what our description was.
So probably 56.5. Would that be? You're doing my math for me.
I'm fine with that.
Because
So
of
he
the
was
certification.
He was less than a year from being PEM.
Right.
So he's not gonna have to have all the different trainings. Do you wanna go even number 58 or stay 56.5? That'd be right in the middle of the two.
57.5 would probably be in the middle.
Okay, we can do this. I'm okay with 57. 57.5.
It's right in the middle of the 50 to 60, 55.
And then tell him on the completion of his PEM, he would be increased to the 60.
Right, because this is a salaried position.
Once he's certified up to 60. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Once he shows completion of
The
the
only
PEM.
certification he still needs, or does he need more than that?
No.
That's the last one he needed.
I think it's good incentive to make sure, because I think he did make a comment like he just needs to get it done, so
Right, and he
that
had,
can be something that.
Was there any issue,
he had a ton of.
how quick could he be moving in our area?
I can
Already
ask
in
that question.
Michigan, I
He's already
assume.
in Michigan.
Well,
Think it
and I
takes-
would suggest
That'd be
that,
a thing too, finding out.
yeah, well, and I would suggest that, because where was he? This last one. Ohio Safety School Center, I mean, I would think that those. A lot of those, you see a lot of them, he's doing jointly, he's doing already. He's doing these trainings and stuff for people. So. I would think it wouldn't be a big problem. No. So the motion is to hire Jonathan Chapman at 57.5 and bump him to the 60 once he's completely certified. And if he accepts, then we can notify everyone else.
Ask, do you want me to ask first a date he can start?
Yes, absolutely.
And we want to stay within the month?
Yes,
in a month.
absolutely. You needed him 6 months ago. Yeah.
So state your motion again, please.
You want me to read what we can? I
Yeah,
wrote
go
it
ahead, 'cause we
Okay.
need to support anyway.
A motion to offer a full-time position as emergency manager director to Jonathan Chapman at a salary of $57,500. And then upon completion of his certification, raised to $60,000. And ask for start date within a month.
And the start date doesn't mean he has to be actually
Yep.
completely moved here either, because you don't know about a house selling. So
Yeah.
I mean, at least if he can start work
Yeah.
here, and actually 2 weeks would be great.
1 second.
Do I need, yes, I need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and support. The position, and it has money attached to it, so let's do a roll call.
You seconded?
Yes.
Rose,
Yes.
DeBrent,
Yes.
Hamlin,
Yes.
Peltier,
Yes.
Hardees.
Yes.
Okay, before you go out of that, do you want a second motion that in case he declines, that I can hire Sarah? Because
I would make that motion to offer, you know, if something happens with Jonathan, that we go ahead and hire Sarah Melching. It would be at the same cost because she's at about the same
Same
level.
thing.
Yeah, I'd second that.
You just want to cover all bases just in case.
To start within 30 days.
Yes, and to still do the start. Great, so we have a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call again.
DeBrent,
Yes.
Hamlin,
Yes.
Peltier,
Yes.
Hardees.
Yes,
Rose.
Yes.
motion passes. Limited public comment.
Before you're gonna, will everybody just send me your scoring anyway, so I can put it in whatever people ask questions? Or even give me your papers next time or whatever, just so I have it all and I can do my ask questions.
I just want to thank April for putting all this stuff together.
Yeah, it made it a lot nicer.
Coordinating all the stakeholders and stuff on the scoring and all that stuff, so it just made it easier for us.
Absolutely. And you think you're gonna remember what they say, and you quickly notice you don't, so.
So I like wrote try to write down as much as I could.
As long as I put his down.
I like the scoring. That's great. Any public comment, none?
I will just tell you, Yvonne just commented on here, I'm gonna text her and let her know what the answer is on if he accepts or not, so she'll have it to report.
Okay. No exception,
Need a motion to adjourn?
Nope, I said without objection, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Okay.
They told me I can do that. I'm thinking that. might be
I
easier.
know.
Okay, I'll give you this just a
I
second.
didn't end up needing that, but thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.